This video features a conversation with Matthew Norton, a senior land acquisition agent for the Division of State Lands in the state of Florida. This conversation, we discuss drinking water, aquifers, endangered species, environmental protection and conservation, the differences between modern and ancient architecture, beauty and society, corporate real estate, geology, and much more. I really hope you enjoy the video. Now here is Matthew Norton.
Yeah, it should be fine. That's a fair point. The city of Tallahassee has a very robust utility system and high quality drinking water.
Yeah. Is it the best in Florida or is it the best in the country?
I've heard that it's the number one public utility in the United States.
So that's what I've heard also.
Although I don't know exactly by what metric or what that exactly means, like the best how, like is that the best quality water or is that the best like service? How are they claiming the best?
Yeah,
the best
what are
the
metrics?
best utility? Okay, right. I don't know what that means.
Based off of what parameters.
Exactly. But I know it's at least good because, for one, we get our drinking water from the aquifer, which is in this part of Florida, it's very, very high quality, clean drinking water, being close to the springs and everything. And then for two, they do testing every year and they'll actually, if you have a house or you rent, you probably get it here too. They'll send you a water quality assessment every year. That kind of goes into the actual different contaminants and their levels in the water supply. And we have good water. So
yeah, do most states actually pull straight from the aquifer, or is that something that's unique to Tallahassee and maybe a few other places? Is that common practice? It's
common, but I think it kind of depends, right? So some states get their drinking water from reservoirs, and so a lot of places like they'll dam up rivers to create reservoirs, and they basically create lakes that way, and then they can pull drinking water from that. Like a lot of out west, they get their drinking water that way, like Lake Mead and others I think that's in Vegas but that supplies a lot of water to that area in the desert. And then in other areas like here, our drinking water comes from the water main, which is basically the city has a giant well that they, tap into the aquifer, and they are extracting a vast, volume of water from that well, from the aquifer. And then they treat it according to, the required drinking water standards. And then when you turn on the tap, right, like they connect. So, the houses and businesses are connected to that water main. So, and then, of course, people have private wells, too. But
yeah, not so much common, at least from what I've seen. But I guess
in rural areas.
Yeah. Do people in Florida have private wells?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I feel like Florida would be a good place for a well because you don't have to dig too far to hit water.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you don't have to dig too far to get water, and it just depends, right? Like if you're in Broward County, like you more than likely don't have a well. I don't know. I mean, but in rural areas, if you were to drive 15 minutes south of here or west of here, you'd find people with wells. I mean, even probably within the city limits, it's very common in rural areas where it might not be feasible or really possible to connect to the water main, because if each city has their own like drinking water system, and so if I'm 30 minutes out in the woods, they can't connect my house to the
you're
system.
Not part of a community. You're sort of just solo.
It's like the electric grid, but the water grid.
Yeah, that's why people, when you watch those off-gridder type shows, or the people who are living off the grid, they have to build their own filtration system.
Yep, their own wells,
their own like rain catching systems,
or that can work.
Whatever it is, but yeah, they don't connect to the main.
Right, because it's just not possible.
Yeah, and it would be very impractical.
Yeah.
To try to do something like that.
Yeah, very expensive, and a lot of times that cost is borne by the property owner. So, whoops.
Yeah, and then also the community that generates just like
Yeah, taxes
revenue,
and stuff, right?
which if you're an independent person living on the island, it's not like you have this community revenue that's
right, you
going
don't
to
have
be
taxes to
paying for this utility.
Yep, exactly. So in unincorporated areas, that's one of the main, I guess, benefits of living in an incorporated city is that you have public utilities, which is, you've established this area. There's a charter, the city of Tallahassee or the city of whatever, and then you have services like paramedics, and you have your own police department and utilities and things like that.
Yeah. And our utilities, are they paid for by taxes? Or is that like what funds utility? Or is that
your utility bill funds
right.
your usage? So when you pay your utility bill, you're paying for the water and electricity that you're using, and then
city services would maybe be more?
Yep. So, actually, you pay your utility bill depending on where you live. Like if you live here in this apartment, this wouldn't be the case. But if you live in a house, then your utility bill often includes a fee that goes to the fire department and a fee that goes for your trash collection and stuff like that. So that's partly at least how those services get funded, and then. Yeah, I'm sure you're, to actually build new water lines and things like that. I'm sure that's tax dollars.
Yeah, I didn't know that. The utilities included like a fire.
Fire service. That's just how you got to do it, I guess. If you need somebody to come when there's a fire, then everybody's got to chip in a little bit.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if it was paid by taxes, or I assumed it was.
And it might vary from place to place. I don't really know for sure, but I know at least for me, like my utility bill includes a charge for fire services and trash and stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it is interesting, honestly. Like most people don't really ever think about that type of stuff or really... consider how that whole system works, to get, just municipal government services. It's kind of like not
like
seen.
You're just kind of born and the world is just churning away no matter what you're doing. Like
you just turn on the
everything
sink.
Just works.
Right. Turn on the sink and the water just comes out. So.
Yeah. That's very trippy to think about also, because it's such a new thing in this age that we live in. That everything just works all the time, basically. And when something does happen, like a hurricane, within 2 days, it's cleaned up, it's fixed, power's back.
Yeah.
It's incredible the pace that we're able to move as a species and able to just get shit done.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you saw, we had obviously tornadoes here.
Yeah, some bad ones.
A few months ago. It's a pretty rare thing in Florida, but they were bad, and got that all handled in 3 days. Mostly the power, at least. I mean, certain businesses are still struggling in certain areas. Like in my neighborhood, they're still rebuilding.
Right.
But
the central city usually is.
Yeah, they get the power back on pretty quick. So people
power's a priority.
Take that for granted.
It is, dude. I know. When the power goes out, you realize how much you rely on it.
Yeah. Well, not to get into, a huge rant about fucking utilities, but, also a lot of places, they have even better systems where they actually bury their power lines.
Dude,
so it's like, in South Florida and,
I was thinking, why don't we do that?
Yeah,
but
I don't know. I mean, there's a cost
do.
associated with doing that. And then, of course, there's like a cost benefit analysis. Like, generally, we don't have really bad storms here. I mean, lately we've been seeing more and more, but South Florida had been ravaged by very bad hurricanes, forever. And I think at some point in the 90s, after Hurricane Andrew, they really revamped the building code and required, all new construction to be built, much more solid to withstand strong hurricanes. And, they've started burying the utility lines. So when, there's storms, that really mitigates power loss, which is really smart. I mean,
Yeah, it's like
it should be that way.
it should be that way across
And
the
I
whole
mean,
state.
why, I always say this too. It's like if you go outside, your brain is really good at like just tuning it out. But if you walk out on the street and actually just take a second and look around, you'll realize there's cords and wires everywhere. I mean, literally connecting all this, running all along the streets, connecting every building to the power poles. Like there's a whole network of cords running over your head, these power lines at all times, and you kind of just tune it out. You don't really look at it or notice, but
Yeah.
like that's all out there. It's definitely not. I mean, it's ugly. You don't really notice it, but like if they could be buried, that'd be a lot better.
It would be. And it's like you notice it only when they're falling down. Like,
Right? Yeah.
but yeah, I was thinking that during the last storm that I just was thinking, why don't we just bury power lines? Because I know there's that new fiber optic Wi-Fi, whatever. They were coming in.
Yeah.
They were going into neighborhoods and they were digging up this trench and implanting this fiber optic connecting it to all the houses underground though. And I just was thinking, why don't they just do that for power? Because anytime a storm comes or anytime a tree just lands on a power line, you're not cutting off the whole grid, or at
Right.
least a section of the grid. Because, I guess the most efficient way technically to run a power grid would be to run like a closed sort of circuit where there's no path, is sort of like every branch of the grid is connecting to, there's like no how would I word this? The most efficient path for a power grid would be one that where if a tree were to fall on one line, it would cut off basically in the entire power grid, because that every single section would be connected to every other section. So there'd be no two branches that connect to the same loop of the grid. You see what I'm saying?
Sort of like you're
I don't
saying
even
it
know.
would
That's
be.
like just a weird random rant that I
It
got
is a
onto.
little bit of a random thought, but I don't know. Honestly, my opinion is that the best way to do it would be if we all had our own solar systems. So solar is, a big topic that gets talked about. People advocate for renewable energy, and I think that's good and bad. It just depends. But solar, it could be done well, but it's usually not done the best way. So, how solar's being done now is that the power companies that already, sell electricity to the citizens, they have generating stations all around where they burn fuel oil and natural gas, and that, basically they use turbines to generate electricity that goes to feed the grid. So that's the main way that we're getting power. But what they've started to do is create solar farms where, if you drive through rural areas, you'll see what used to be farmland is now being leased to the power company, and they're setting up hundreds of acres of solar panels. So, that's good in some ways because, we're generating that power from the sun, and then that power goes into the grid. And when you turn on your lights, you're receiving power that was generated by a solar farm as opposed to being generated by a typical, generating station. But that system keeps us tied to the grid and tied to the power company. So, for the consumer, it's not really all that different. We're still kind of at their mercy, if you will. We have to pay to maintain their grid. And so what I think would be the best way to do it is if we, when possible, had individual solar systems on our rooftops, and we didn't have to connect to the grid. So, this house could have its own panels on the roof. You generate the power for your own home, and that's it. And maybe, if there's a gap where maybe you need more power than you're able to generate, then you could still connect to the grid in some way, but you wouldn't have to. But the way it is now, that's mostly not widespread.
Yeah, it's like there are solar panels now, but it changes nothing for the consumer, but everything for the producer. In a
Yeah,
sense.
because solar is a threat to these power companies. So the power companies obviously have a great business model, and we all have to pay them for our electricity. And if we all just had solar, independent solar systems, then that would really be a threat to their business model. So what do is, they pivot and they start creating solar farms so they can direct this, the development of solar to benefit them instead of cutting them out of the picture. They're getting their piece of the pie. So,
Yeah.
and then of course, the downside to that is that it takes hundreds or thousands of acres of, what was otherwise working agricultural land, or worse, natural habitat, and just a natural land cover has been converted to thousands of acres of solar panels. So there is a cost to that as well. But you drive through rural areas and you'll see that that's pretty widespread now.
Yeah, it seems like it'd actually be more practical to do what you were saying was the individual panels on the house, and then if you need to, you can still have some sort of government, or not government, but like some sort of access to power.
Yeah. And
If
I
you
mean,
need
some
it.
folks have that, and people do that.
Third party.
And that is growing in some ways, but even that, it's not a perfect system. And I don't know that much about how like home solar systems work, but I'm pretty sure you still have to connect to the grid. And I don't know, I've heard of this thing called net metering, where I guess like if you generate more power than you need, you can kind of sell it back to the power company.
That's pretty cool.
So that's pretty good, but I don't really know all the details to speak too intelligently about it. So I know it is happening, at least in some ways.
Right. I don't know anything about it either, but I just remember hearing about this was like years ago also, but when you do get solar panels, you still have to pay someone or some sort of energy tax. I don't
right.
know.
And I don't know. And I think that's what I'm getting at, is that it's not perfect. It's not like you can just connect to the panels
and just get free energy
and right, generate your own power. And then of course the panels are expensive. So you've got to, like most folks that get those systems, like, they're paying them off for a while unless you buy it in cash. If you're wealthy.
How much are solar panels for like a house, do you think?
It depends on the square footage of the house, and probably there's different types of panels and stuff. So I don't even know, but I would say double digits, thousands.
Yeah.
Like
almost
10K
equal to
plus or
installing like a pool. Like,
yeah, I mean, it could be.
that's like a equivalent of house renovations.
Oh yeah, it's a big thing. And insurance companies don't like it.
Why don't they like it? Because they can get destroyed.
Yeah, they can be destroyed. It's a valuable, it's a valuable part of your home that's exposed to the elements. And I think that, things can go wrong, and
And they gotta pay out. So
yeah, they don't, and I don't know, maybe it can damage your roof and stuff. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
So there's
Makes
that.
sense. What are your thoughts on nuclear energy?
I think nuclear energy is probably the best solution that we have. And it's not perfect either, but it's funny. I was just talking to somebody else about this the other day. I think nuclear, we've made a lot of progress since, the 70s and 80s, when nuclear was first, kind of in the public space. So now when you talk about nuclear energy, people think about these disasters that happen, like Chernobyl or Fukushima in Japan, or 3 Mile Island, I think it's called, and that's somewhere in, I think, Pennsylvania. So there's been a number of like environmental disasters that have been caused by malfunctions at nuclear power plants, and that gives people concern, and it's been used as kind of an argument against nuclear. But nuclear is great because you can generate so much energy very efficiently and relatively cleanly. And I think that there's been great strides made in, how to manage the waste and to manage the safety of the process. So it's definitely a lot better now than it was in the 70s. And so I think a lot of that fear is, maybe not needed. And I'm sure, again, the power companies and others have every reason to not change the status quo. And if nuclear is super awesome and efficient, but if it's not something that, the players in power can immediately capitalize off, then they're not going to want to change and transition to it. But I think that's probably the best we've got in terms of generating energy with minimal waste, minimal. I think it's just pretty efficient. And again, like, I'm not an expert by any means, but it's just based off what I know. I think it's probably what we should be focusing on.
I agree. If we could make nuclear energy, if we could continue advancing in that direction, it's already a very promising.
It's very promising
field of
That's right.
research. And so it's funny how the ones who are like the current energy companies and people who have the throne appeal to that fear,
right?
To it's always some sort of appeal to fear that they use to drive out anything that is competing directly with their source of income.
Yeah, that's well said. And they do it for nuclear, they do it for solar. They've and it's solar.
It's almost anything. Like the
fear,
fear,
and beyond energy too. I mean, they do this for everything, other things, healthcare, and plenty of other things. And so, yeah, I think they used to do the same thing with solar. They still kind of do. They say that solar's not good enough. It's not efficient. And well, what about when it's cloudy out? And some of those arguments have merit a little, but it could be done. And they try to act like solar's not a viable solution, and maybe it's not fully yet, but for some people it could be.
Yeah, it could be just another tool in the bag. It's like I feel like it's hard to envision a world where we have one source of energy that's just the ultimate source that everything comes from, like the sun.
Yeah.
To me, it seems more reasonable to use solar where it's applicable, because it'll probably be the best for certain things, whereas in other areas nuclear might be more efficient, and in other areas you might have to just resort to fossil fuels. But if we could try to narrow that scope away from fossil fuels and more towards other things, then that seems like the best the best direction to sort of head in. But
yeah, that makes sense, right? Like, you probably can't power New York City off solar panels,
right?
It wouldn't make sense. It doesn't work. But you could use solar where applicable. A large warehouse in Texas could have a lot of solar panels on the roof.
It's got all that space up there. It's like basically you don't have to take down a farm, like a bunch of fields to get that surface area. It's right there for you, accessible, part of your property, and it's not doing anything else other than reflecting sunlight.
Right.
So it's the perfect spot for it.
Well, the powers that be don't like folks to be independent. So
right, they like to keep
dependence on them.
Exactly.
Whenever possible.
Yeah. And I think the idea I think nuclear energy also would be great. But I think one of the main issues with it is, or not one of the main issues, but one of the issues that I came across somewhere, and I thought it was an interesting thing to think about, is when you use nuclear energy, you inevitably produce nuclear waste, which is this very radioactive material. And so you have to pack it up and store it somewhere, usually in some sort of, what do they call it? Like a coffin or sarcophagus or whatever, something that like some lead container that they encapsulate it in and block out the radiation. But the idea is, what if in, thousands of years from now, nuclear energy is long forgotten, but then people stumble upon this nuclear waste. How can we label it so that we can indicate, what sort of symbol can we use to indicate to these people that this is dangerous, don't open it? Because it almost seems like whatever symbol you put on it, it's going to be enticing and they're going to want to open it. And because and that's where
Skull and crossbones,
right?
That's all I can think of.
Yeah,
but I mean, I don't know. That's a good point, I guess.
it's just, I thought it was a fun thing to think about, but it's not necessarily actually a imminent problem with nuclear energy.
Yeah, and I mean that kind of rings true with anything. I mean, thousands of years from now, how will we convey, really anything if, hypothetically, right? Like if technology was lost and the world was, different and people had to rediscover things, like how would we convey any of that information? So,
Yeah.
That's just another example, but
Like we don't know half the symbols that we read sometimes, and when we decipher them, or just half the ancient depictions of art and stuff.
Exactly.
Something that you see as this disc that's like, dude, I heard like this Gregory Aldrete, famous, or he's very, very intelligent historian he's a what do you call it? He studied ancient Rome.
okay.
And he was saying that what if you see this like disc that's drawn on everybody's house or something, or a disc that's in every dorm room, say 1,000 years from now, and you're excavating this ancient dorm room that's been buried by a bunch of rubble, and you're finding this floppy little plastic disc in every single room, and you'd be like, okay, so it's round. They worshipped the sun. Everybody has it, They must be worshippers of the sun. And it turns out, it's just a frisbee that everybody. Yeah. So like the idea is that
plate.
we assign meaning to these objects and ancient artifacts that we don't actually know what they are, and they're probably just everyday household items like a toilet paper roll.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, a lot
and
of
we call it like this, this very religious, spiritual item that everybody used.
Yeah.
For sacred purposes.
Well, I think anthropologists and archaeologists are, very, they overestimate what they actually know. And I think, I don't know what, it's like an ego thing, but a lot about ancient cultures is very poorly understood. And I think we make a lot of assumptions,
right?
To your point.
Yeah, there seems to not be a lot of humility in the anthropology scene of things, where they accept that they might not be right and are willing to pursue the truth openly.
Yeah. And there's core assumptions that they make that kind of then drive the rest of their viewpoint. So the core assumptions are that, societies back then were not advanced. They had a very simple understanding of the world and the laws of physics and nature, and they lived a very religious life. And maybe that's true, and for some cultures I'm sure it is, but a lot of those assumptions that we make then kind of dictate how we view the entire culture, or entire swaths of history. Like, how people argue the pyramids were built, and things like that. We really don't know all that much about the culture and when they were even actually built. So it's easy to make that assumption that, well, if, they were constructed by a class of Egyptians that was very, hierarchical, and they had a pharaoh and they had slaves, then it stands to reason that, the slaves built the pyramids and it was for religious purposes, and this is a tomb, and right. But a lot of that is just assumptions. We don't really know.
Right. It's not in writing. So it's really is just assumptions. It's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
Or not, it's not even, because it's not testable. It's not a hypothesis. It's a theory. So yeah, that's one of the great things about history, though, is when you start looking at it and looking into it, it's so fascinating to look at all these different points of view that different people have, because there could be anything could explain it, you know? We don't actually know.
Yeah, we don't know.
And that
We
makes
don't
it
know.
very fun. You can let your imagination sort of paint in the gaps.
Yeah, I mean, I really do wonder how a lot of these ancient structures were constructed, and if they had. I mean, it seems like they must have had some technology that's been lost or at least not understood at this time.
Right.
So,
Whatever they did, yeah, it's just probably just different or not understood. And one of the weird things is that for throughout history, for like all of human history, basically, everybody was farmers. 99.99% of every single person alive was a farmer working on a farm with a close knit community who probably didn't venture, 20 miles away from home. And they stayed in their little village community and conversed with the local people, and that was their life. Whereas what's in the history books is these like 0.01% of events, these standout events that actually write the books, that 1% of people that are at the top of the chain, the poets and the writers, the emperors and the spiritual leaders. And that's what's recorded, but that's a very inaccurate depiction of what human life was like in these times. And it was because a majority of people were out just busting their haunches.
yep, just trying to feed themselves, their family, keep a roof over their head.
Yeah. And so I think
Survival.
trying to understand the daily life of a human being back then provides much more insight into what history was like rather than understanding these pinnacle events that are recorded, which are also still fascinating. But yeah, I think I thought it was and that was something I sort of picked up from the Gregory Aldrete.
Mm-hmm.
He was on Lex Friedman podcast, and I thought it was so interesting. He had so much to say about that. And I recommend, dude, if you haven't listened to it, I recommend you listen to it.
Yeah,
It was
I
one of
have
my
not.
favorite
I would-
podcasts
I
I've
would
listened
like.
to in probably a while. It was super fascinating.
Yeah.
He's this expert in Roman history and Roman ancient warfare, and he's like so fascinating to listen to the way he talks about ancient Rome and all that stuff.
Yeah, ancient Rome is very interesting. That culture, kind of, when you think about ancient history, I think the Romans are like the quintessential example of what, at least what I think about. So
Yeah, of just prosperity and civilization of the ancient world. The Romans are like,
and the life
where it's
cycle
at.
of civilization, from creation to expansion and eventually decline and collapse. There's a lot to be learned from that.
And just their political system also, how influential it was in the grand scheme of things, and how much of modern day political systems derive their values from the Roman political system, and also warfare techniques, where the Romans were just really good at developing these different warfare techniques and tactics that people even in World War II were even using. Like the idea of Hitler's blitzkrieg, he was pulling from this one ancient Roman general who was just brilliant and decided to his idea, dude, if I can remember it right, his idea was that when you were fighting back in ancient Rome, what would happen is the troops would line up in a wall, and you would have the weak sort of cannon fodder in the front, the people who were just probably going to die. And then you'd have your stronger troops in the back and sort of in the middle. And then just, can't remember what you had in the back, but maybe more cannon fodder. And so the idea was that your weaker troops would go head on first and sort of clear out the way and make way for the stronger troops to sort of get in the middle and do what they're doing and just kick ass.
Yeah.
But what this one general did is he discovered, what if we hold back some of our stronger troops in the very back And then when the weak troops, the peasants and whatnot, they all just start fighting at the front. We're gonna peel around to the sides, and then we're gonna come around from the sides and sort of entrap the stronger troops on the other team and flank them from both sides. So then you have the wall of weaker troops in the front blocking them, and then your stronger troops coming in from behind on the side flanks, and then you kind of circle them in, and it's totally unexpected. And that's kind of what Hitler used as his blitzkrieg strategy in World War II.
Interesting.
And so I thought that was so fascinating.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, I guess, from a war fighting perspective, there could be a lot to learn from Roman times in that they were successful in conquering much of the world at that time, or at least a large portion of their region. They were quite successful.
Very long time also.
Yeah.
Hundreds of years. And they got so big that it was like too hard to contain.
Yeah.
Because at that time also, their size was so large. Like it was on a space-time scale, they were technically larger than what like the globe is today in their empire, than what a global empire would be, say, because today if you wanted to fly to the farthest point on the planet, you could get there within 24 hours probably. You could somehow travel there.
Okay.
Whereas back then, the Roman Empire had parts that like where if you wanted to get from one end of the empire to another, it would take a group of men 3 months to get from here to here. And it was so somehow like if the emperor wanted to relay information from this part of the empire to there, it's like the emperor's not really ruling over here. Like,
right.
He's relaying this message, but in the meantime, they're just doing what they think they have to do.
Yeah.
And so there's this delay that's very hard to actually rule an empire that's this large back then. So technically, their space-time, if you view it from a point of view of space-time, they had a much larger empire because the time it took for them to travel was much larger to different parts of the. And if you consider space and time to be the same thing, then technically,
right, I see what you're saying.
there'd be more space because there's more time, and it's that sort of relative idea.
Right. Yeah, well, that's an interesting point too, that like the fringes of the empire, you can't control them from a distance. And I think that's contributed to the collapse, is ultimately that, those, I don't know what you would call them, those, not colonies, but those territories on the fringes of the empire, probably were plagued by, rebels and infighting and just not a whole lot of control, because, like you said, right, if the center of operations is 3 months away, I mean, you can call it yours, but
yeah, who's to say that some other guy isn't gonna rise up and just sort of take over that territory?
Exactly.
And so I think that's what would happen. And
probably did.
There would be people fight whenever there was a power vacuum. That sort of people would try to fight for emperor's position, And I think that's what Augustus successfully did, or Octavius, who changed his name to Augustus. He successfully was fighting these, like when Caesar was killed, he was the one who ended up successfully coming out and taking over and taking control of the Roman Empire and beating the other people who were trying to do it also. But I think a big part of his strategy was that, not that he was the best general in war, he was not the best general and strategist, but he was incredible with words and propaganda. So he was able to win the people over and have them fight for him, even though he wasn't the best at doing war things. So he was apparently very, very incredible with his words, and that was something that Romans really took value to also, was being good at oration, or being a good orator.
Articulate.
Yeah, being very articulate. That was a big part of their culture.
Yeah.
And Augustus he sort of mastered that. He was 18, I think. He was 18 or 17 when he took over the Roman Empire.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you know about Augustus for?
It was from this Gregory Aldrete.
Oh, it's the same.
It was so fascinating. I could like, it stuck with me. It was that fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to that. He was like, it was like after Julius Caesar died, it was like the idea was he was killed because he became sort of an emperor, like a king.
Mm-hmm.
And the Romans wanted to avoid having kings. It was like, we don't want to have another king. Julius Caesar became a very outspoken sort of king figure, even though he didn't call himself a king.
Mm-hmm.
He said that he was like, I am the one ruler for life of Rome, you know? And so he was killed. And because he was killed, the next person, so what he did he had like a posthumous sort of, he posthumously adopted Augustus as his son after he died, which is a very strange thing. And it's not known exactly why he did that, I think. But what happened was this didn't mean that Augustus was going to just become emperor, because he didn't have an actual heir to the throne.
Julius Caesar did.
Right, yeah, Julius Caesar didn't. But Augustus figured out that because he was adopted as his son, then he could change his name to, I forgot what it was called, but it was basically Julius Caesar. He could like legally, technically change his name to Julius Caesar because he was now his son. And because he could do that, he could go out to these armies that were, you know, just like a month's travel away. And he could be like, I am Julius Caesar. And he'd be like, I command your army. And he's not lying because he technically is that guy. And he was able to do this and sort of win over these people. But then once he became emperor, the idea was he was really smart. And he was like, how can I be emperor and rule these people, but also not be called a king because they will kill me if I'm called a king? And so he came up with all these different ways to call himself basically to just be emperor without being a king. And it was, I don't know how to get into the details. That's like over my head, but
well, I mean, I think it was
well
brilliant. Yeah, that is brilliant. And it's, to me, it's so funny how it really shows like how much you could get away with. I mean, of course, way back then, but like even recently before technology, you know, like even up as recently as like into the, you know, like into the 90s and stuff, like people could just kind of lie and say whatever. And like, you know, there's no way to check, you know, you could say, oh yeah, I mean,
you'd have to go get your like dictionary and thesaurus. I don't even know what a thesaurus is, honestly.
Right. I mean, people could, you know, politicians could be like, oh yeah, I mean, I was a veteran and you
couldn't fact check
could
it.
Just lie. And especially like if it was just in a conference or at a, you know, let's say a politician's giving a speech in front of a crowd. I mean, it's not being recorded. There's no audio. There's no video. They could just say whatever they want, lie. The crowd will have no way to check, and nobody will ever know. I mean,
yeah, the only way it would be is if like a headline got published about it in the New York Times or something.
Right. I mean,
and at that point, it would have to be enticing enough for the Times to want to write an article and make money off that. You know, if it was some small lie, they're not going to cover that because I'm sure everybody was doing it, you know?
And half the time they propagate the lie. So, I mean, it's not like the, you know, the newspapers are really out here trying to get to the bottom of things and provide truth.
Right.
That's certainly not
exactly.
their MO.
They want to propagate that.
They want to propagate the lie. I mean,
so they probably were covering it, but propagating it as propaganda for whatever they were supporting or maybe not supporting, who knows, but yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I just remembered though, just to backtrack 1 second. What Augustus did to not be called a king was he basically kept the order of the Republic going as usual before Julius Caesar. And, well, hold up. Yes, before Julius Caesar, because it was like the Republic. Julius Caesar was the end of the Republic and the beginning of the empire. And so Augustus was like, we're going to create the facade that this is still the Republic. I'm going to appoint my counselors and appoint like the Justice Department. We're going to have a court. You're all going to have your jobs. You're going to do all the same work you've been doing, but I am like the chief overseer of the courts. And so whenever I want, if I want to, I can do whatever I want. I could say, no, this doesn't go. Yes, this goes. And so he had this secretly in the back scene of things was controlling everything or could control everything, but at the same time was letting the normal operations of the Republic go on, whereas it was actually just an empire and he was the emperor secretly disguised behind this new title that he would call himself chief of the justice system or whatever he called himself. I forgot what it was. And so he was brilliant. If you learn about him, he got to watch that podcast.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. That seems really interesting. Hate to do it, but
bathroom break?
Yeah, we're going to have to cut it.
Go for it. All good. We can just cut it down. Honestly.
Yeah, we'll just whatever works.
Little bathroom break. We're back. So, but yeah, I was thinking something that was just giving me a little chills to think about those, that to just think how usually you have people who are in the position to lead people, or you have somebody who's really smart, or you have a leader who is just god awful and just greedy, hungry for power. And it's crazy to see how Augustus he was great at leading and also intelligent and could figure it out himself at the same time and take on this empire and do it basically like single-handedly. I mean, I'm sure he had people there for him, but he was brilliant and a great leader and a great speaker. All these things combined in one 18-year-old who was able to take over this empire. And just to think that how brilliant it was for it all to line up for this one kid to be able to just be like, I'm gonna be like the main character here, and I'm gonna move these chess pieces around. It almost gives you chills to think that there's people like that are born every now and then that are just so different from everybody else and set apart from them in so many ways. They're just truly like just incredible figures.
Yeah, I mean, they're
the whole package.
And the main thing I think you kind of touched on is it's the ability to influence people.
Yeah, and to wield that power with responsibility and the influencing, though, that was the main.
To almost manipulate.
Yes, manipulate, but also not to use the manipulation purely for evil. To be that good at manipulating, but also to not do it strictly for evil purposes. And sure, a lot of it was to get himself into a position of power, but there were way worse emperors than him. He was regarded as the emperor that everybody wanted to be like. He was like, he was very influential. And after Augustus, everybody wanted to be like Augustus, and they named themselves after him. He was like the example of who to be when you are emperor. That's like where the name Imperatus, whatever it comes from. And every emperor would call themselves that afterwards to try to be like Augustus, because that's what he would call himself. And that's where we get the term emperor from. And then there's so many different names throughout history that date back, or like many thousands of years later, or just not many thousands, but like throughout time, leaders would start naming themselves after Augustus all the way up to Napoleon, which is, I don't even know, it's like 1,000 years later.
Yeah,
because he was so influential that he shaped a big part of what leadership meant for the ancient world.
Yeah, and it's crazy too to think about like how all that happened, and now that whole sphere of influence is just gone. Like, modern day Rome and Italy is, a very small country that, it still has a great culture and great people, and they've got a leader, but by no means is,
it's not the
Italy
center
like
of
the center of the free world. And, it's just funny that they, like, I guess the British Empire is very much the same, probably even more so that very recently the British Empire had taken over, I mean, much of the globe,
Yeah, they were just like this
all
imperialist nation.
imperialist nation that had conquered all sorts of countries in Asia and Africa and islands here and there. And then, of course, founded the United States as their colonies. And at a certain point, the British Empire may have been, I mean, I don't know, it may have been the largest. And I don't know, perhaps, I don't, we could go all the way back to Genghis Khan. I don't know about
right.
There's been a number,
Yeah.
or
Genghis Khan was a
Mansa
savage.
Musa, right? Like,
Yeah.
you hear about, is an African, emperor type figure that was extremely wealthy and had a lot of influence. But they collapse in these cycles of boom and bust, and you can't help but think we're on a track now in our modern society that is, declining our just our culture, and
Right. The
our
culture.
society is declining. And you can see, if you learn from history, people think it would never happen, or we could never be erased in that way, but
it's just what happens.
it's what happens, because last I checked, the Romans today aren't really in charge of much,
Right.
aren't really leading much. So and that's not to disparage Rome. I think it's I love it. It's great, it's awesome, love Rome, but
Yeah,
just interesting.
America right now sort of is that figure, like as the
Yeah.
top of the world, sort of the leader of the free world. And so when we look at the culture, it's hard to say if we already hit our climax, and if we're on our way down, or if there's still grounds to be covered.
Yeah, I mean,
in
I
a
think
positive direction.
I think we're on our way down, but that's not to say that it couldn't be, reversed. It doesn't mean we have to continue straight
Right.
down.
Yeah.
But I think undoubtedly we are on the way down. If you just,
I think no matter what, change is imminent. Change is coming. It could be for better, it could be for worse, but it's not going to be the same America that it was 200, 300 years ago.
300 years ago.
Well, 17, not quite 300.
Yeah, but
18, 19.
I get your point.
Okay, 200 years. Okay.
Yeah. But no. All right. Not to take away from your point. I think that's well said. And it's already not. I mean, it's not even the same America that it was in 1985. I mean, as technology continues to advance, technology is advancing, but it's not helping humanity advance. I've heard, the purpose of technology
Right.
was initially to help and benefit humans. So, right, like we were talking about earlier, humans used to be a predominantly agricultural society, and that was mostly what we did. Was we, produced crops and established little, homesteads and communities, and we traded and, bartered and whatever, but very agricultural based. And so, you got to think probably some of the first major technological advancements were, at the advent of agriculture and, agricultural inventions, right? Like, think about like a plow that gets pulled by a mule versus a hand plow, right? Like you can plow your field 10 times faster. You don't
have to break your back.
You don't have to break your back. And so things like that, the cotton gin and, just all kinds of other agricultural advancements. I mean, cotton gin, that's way later, but
So
the
take
early
some sort of burden off of you so that
take
you
some-
have time to focus on things that are more important.
Yes, so that's the purpose of technology, was to take burden off of humanity and to make things easier, and basically to benefit us. And so, that's what those early inventions did, right? Like I just said, the plow or whatever. But now, we have inventions and technology that's advancing, but it's really not helping humanity.
Yeah,
Some of it is, of course, but some of it is most certainly not.
It's not taking away any burden as much as it is just adding like falsely perceived convenience, Like
Yeah.
a lot of it is just out of convenience where it's not necessarily, these things aren't burdensome anymore. And it's taking a lot away. It's making people lazy. That's one thing is technology will do, make people very lazy. But also it's kind of reversed where now it's used to actually, instead of help people, it has become the burden in terms of addiction to screen time. It's a very addictive pathway in the brain with the way the dopamine circuits work, and these short form content, and then also there's pornography, which is highly addictive. People make money off of it.
Yeah.
And it's directly related to this just technological advancement. So
Yeah.
it has become what was once the helping hand has become,
It's no longer serving us.
The burden.
And I think that those examples that you just named are good examples. But then, of course, the big one nowadays is AI. So of course, AI can be an amazing tool that can help people in a lot of ways. But if you really think about it, is it helping people or is it replacing people or replacing? It's replacing the thinking for you.
It's taking away the necessity to think and use your mind.
Yeah.
It's doing the thinking for you.
It's not really a tool as much as it is a substitute. And so what you get is if you compare, children now or just the general population now to, the population in the 1950s, you can see old videos from the 50s of school children being interviewed, and they're so smart and so articulate, well put together, mature. And
I need to watch that.
I'm
I'm interested.
there's actually this guy I really like. His name is David Hoffman, and he's like a filmmaker, is what he calls himself. But he has been making documentaries and short films for decades, and so he has all this content. He's an old man now, but he has all this content that he's produced over the decades of very random, various projects, right? Like, at some point in the 80s, like he would have an assignment to interview Vietnam veterans and talk about their experience, or he got hired to do a short piece for this or that, right? So he was hired to do a lot of random jobs, and so he's got a lot of sort of random content, but he posts it out on the internet and on YouTube, and you can look, and it provides these really interesting windows into how people behaved and thought, back then. And, what I always think is just striking is when you see interviews with school children, and it almost doesn't even matter what they're talking about. Like, I think I saw one where he was asking these kids, like, so what do you think the future is going to be like? And it really, the content of their response is less important than just how they are speaking and how they conduct themselves. Like they're like little adults, and you just think, gosh,
like they're thinking. They're
and they can articulate so well, and they're smart and thoughtful and mature. And just now we have kids that just run around and skibbity doodah, I don't even know.
They're tantrums, and they're not disciplined.
Not disciplined. They don't have any meaningful thoughts about anything.
That only hurts them. It's not like that benefit, it's
right. And that's a result of, less education and more reliance on technology. And then, not only that, but then the sort of a side effects of technology, dysregulating or deregulating your normal, pathways for like attention span and,
right.
Like interest and things like that.
Yeah. And also like a culture, I feel like it could be a part of it is this cultural degradation that sort of happens in some sense where it's the culture used to be so, like in this analogy, it's like it used to be so tight, and over time it kept getting looser and looser and looser with this freedom that we have in America, to the point where now parents aren't nearly the same as what parents used to be
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah, we used to value ourselves and our culture, and we used to take pride in the way that we presented ourselves and the way that we did things. I mean, for example,
and the way that our children acted, that
Yeah.
was like,
in the way that everybody behaved. Like, we were a society that really valued decorum and in class. And so I think, like, if you watch any video from David Hoffman or from others, just any
or
video
reading literature from then.
or
They
reading
used to
literature from then,
The writing is so eloquent.
so
It's-
eloquent and articulate. But the point I was getting at here is that men, they used to leave the house every day in a suit and a hat, a fancy fucking suit and a hat, and like they would go about their business like, I'm running to the market, and they would all,
Yeah.
or like if there's like, you look at a photo of like a train terminal or just a city sidewalk in New York City or any city, everybody walking by to and fro, they're all dressed in like their finest suits, and women would wear dresses and nice clothes, and the children were behaved, and we used to take pride in that, and it used to be considered disrespectful to leave the house looking like a slob, because you're not, it's disrespectful to others, even, like, that you are supposed to compose yourself and have a level of decorum when you enter a public space, that like you have respect for others around you, that you would actually dress up. And I mean, so of course, like, now we think of that as kind of extreme, and but we've swung way to the other end of things, where people don't give a fuck about anything anymore. They don't care about how they behave, how they compose themselves, how they act in public or even in private. And so we've lost all of that, and that's certainly not an advancement in society. And
it's like, and if you are someone who it still has those values, it's no longer valued the same way it used to be. So you don't get that sort of, like, I feel like that it used to be somehow gratifying back then when everybody was on the same page and you were a part of that culture. Whereas now, no matter what you do, it doesn't really matter.
yeah,
in
well,
terms that could have been a bad thought, honestly.
but the social, like, so the compliance aspect of that came from people would, it's not like anybody was forcing you to leave the house in a suit and a hat, but people cared enough that if they didn't do that, they would be viewed in a certain way. And so the compliance was more that, like, we all had a certain standard and we held each other to that standard. And so that created, we
It
would,
was like, yeah, it was just another aspect of responsibility that you could shoulder. And as we know, responsibility is what provides meaning and purpose to life. And so even something as small as that, I feel like, could add to the meaning of life, whereas it's just one more thing to be responsible about and just to consider,
and
as small as it may be.
for sure. And I don't really think it's small, because it's evidence of the larger phenomenon that you see in all aspects of our world now, is that people do not take pride in what they do and how they act. And so, back in the day, a builder who was going to build a house for somebody took pride in building that house, and they did it with craftsmanship, and they wanted to make it beautiful. It's an expression of themselves and their work. And they would, if you look at ancient architecture, it's apparent, right? Like, going back to Rome, for one, God, look at how the Roman architecture in these ancient cities, but even much, much more recent, like, look at how, old neighborhoods are built. If you drive through a neighborhood that was built in, the early 20th century, each house is, not only are many of them still standing because they were built right, but they were built with craftsmanship, and somebody took pride in that, and then you took pride in living in that, and so now it's like people don't take pride in anything they do, and it's this example of like architecture is just a great one, because now you drive down any street and it's like, okay, you see a restaurant, and what does the restaurant look like? It is a gray rectangle block with just like plain letters on it. Like, it's like they make it so soulless. Excuse me. So soulless, and just it's like they're doing
temporary. It's like a temporary little get like just.
But
a
it's
hut,
evidence that they don't care about you.
Right.
They don't care about you. They don't care about making something nice for you.
Yeah.
They don't care about doing a good job or creating something for society or for the community, or there's all this accountability is not there, and I think it really is, maybe not fully intentional, but like it's designed to show people that like, hey, we don't care about you. Like, you can have the bare minimum, and seriously, if you drive down the street and look at it, just the architecture, even, it's ridiculous. Like, we just don't build anything with any beauty or soul to it at all. And I've heard people make this point before, but it's something I really agree with. And that's why, old cities and old towns have that charm. They have that life, it's because
like the cobblestone streets are still there.
Yeah. Nowadays, man, they just, you drive through an area that was forest 10 years ago, and it's now a suburban area where the houses are built as cheap as possible using like
toothpicks,
styrofoam and plastic.
Yeah.
And like just every corner they can cut, they will cut. They'll build them as close as they can to one another. And that's if you're lucky to even have a house. Like, most of the time they really just, they want all people to live in apartments, and they want you to just have less and less, and to just accept that. And there's no life there. There's no soul there. You drive through these new areas that are recently built, these suburban areas, and it's just like, I think it so artificial and just such a bad feeling. Like, I can think of many places that are like that. And perhaps the Villages in Central Florida is like the best example of like just so artificial and strange. And, but then like, if you drive through a town that's been around for 100 or 200 years, you've got the city square and the plaza, and the courthouse was built beautifully. It's still standing with the columns, and people used to give a fuck.
I feel like that's something that people somehow, whether subconsciously or consciously, just long for that.
We do.
We may not even realize it, but I feel like, and you can find that in the films that we watch and the games we like to play, is that you'll watch these films, maybe like an old Western, and it'll make you long for that sense of community and that sense of the whole sense of that era. Or like, there's Red Dead Redemption 2. Why was that one of the biggest, most popular games of the decade? Well, if you actually I played it, and one of the appeals to it was that it makes you long for that sense of authenticity to life, where people, just exactly what you were saying, that rural type of, for something more, to not just have the bare minimum,
Yeah. Well, people don't want to. They
life
don't
with
want
character, like just have some sort of character and charm to life, whatever it may be. And so I feel like that's part of also why electronics and the film industry, and I don't know if that's a cause of this leading away, of this sort of turning away from old values and turning towards the bare minimum, right? But I feel like you said, a carpenter used to really have this passion about his work, and he would put it would be something he really cared about. And now I wonder if technology plays a role in that, because people have all this distraction in life and they want to just be a YouTuber, or they just want to have some sort of business that involves technology, and just the values are different of this culture to make money and be successful. Yeah. What it means to be successful now is very different than what it meant back then. And so,
sure. And we don't make things anymore nearly the way, I mean, you know, manufacturing is a good example, but just like in general, right? Like, and it does kind of come back to technology is replacing a lot of what humans used to do and take pride in. But I think, you know, that the fact that we're longing for more, you can see that evidenced in everything we do, because even, you know, the way that people are ingesting their information now, people long for long form podcasts. They enjoy the substance and the content. They don't want everything to be an empty shell. And I think that comes from, you know, as our society went, you know, I think it really comes from sort of monopolization or like consolidation of industry that, you know, in decades past, if you needed to buy, you know, let's say you needed to buy a hammer, you would go to Johnny's local hardware, and you know, it was like the hardware store in your town, and it was a family business. And you know, if you needed something done, you know, if you needed a barn built, you had, you know, the community come raise your barn. But just random examples. But like now it's like it's all consolidated, so it's like Walmart. Like you go there for everything, and so there's not family business. There's not people taking pride in their craft, in their industry, and then also there's not that accountability that like I'm signing my name on this. Like I value the work I'm doing. It's all commercialized, nameless, faceless, huge corporations that like even the home building, right? Like most homes that are built now are not built by an architect and a craftsman that's gonna. They're built by, you know, huge companies that they do exactly what we said. They build as many as they can, as cheap as they can, all across the country, and they're looking at returns, and you know, they don't care at all to make anything nice for you, or they don't care at all if, you know, if the construction they do is going to, you know, severely create flooding problems with stormwater runoff, and you know, they don't plan, they don't care. It's just all about just churn it out. And so, you know, you end up with, you know, society is like, we're all consumers now. You know, we're a society of consumers.
Yeah, nobody's a contributor.
Nobody is producing anything. We all are just consumers. And so,
right. It used to be like a community where everybody contributes something of value.
Right.
Your position is not only wanted, but necessary for the community to thrive.
And you take pride in that.
Yeah.
So you do a good job. You care. That
Give
gives you
meaning,
purpose.
Yeah. Purpose and meaning. Yep. Yeah. And you could go home, take your hat off, and feel good about yourself.
Take your hat and suit off.
Yeah. And yeah, there was just a sense of community. I feel like that's something that really lacks today. There's no sense of community. You know, everybody, you could go out and walk past like hundreds of people per day, and nobody even looks at you once. It's like all these people, you don't even, it's so different than it used to be, you know?
Yeah. And I think it comes back to the technology thing where we started this topic, is that like we're the most connected we've ever been, but the most disconnected we've ever been. Right. You know, it's like in theory we're all connected, and you know, it's this technological world of we're all connected, and we can communicate with people in Australia and, you know, all across the world and this and that, but we're the most disconnected we've ever been, because we're not actually, that's not real connection, you know, is what we, I guess, are finding out, is that that's not the same.
Yeah. And connection really is, a lot of it, I guess, is more embedded in your role in society than we may realize.
Yeah.
Like you were supposed to play a role. You're not just supposed to be this like this name on a screen, you know?
Yeah, and I think it also kind of comes back to this other thought that, like, people used to kind of govern themselves on a local level a lot more efficiently and effectively. So, I mean, that is sure local government, but also just like the local population kind of keeping society in check. Like each town, like you were saying, right? Everybody kind of had their role. You had the local mom and pop shop, you had the milkman, you had the whatever, right? Everybody's got their role, everybody's contributing something, and then so you all felt like you were a cohesive society, and you could make decisions on a local level that were best for you and your community, and organized in that way. And now a lot of it is that we're all disconnected. We all just live here. A lot of people came from other places, and you're basically
Strangers. Everybody, your neighbors are just strangers.
yeah, your neighbors are strangers, and you don't know anybody in your community, or a lot of folks. This isn't for everybody, but and so these local municipalities are not operating the same way as they used to when there was like the county sheriff that was going to maintain law and order, and everybody knew everybody. And of course, as we grow and everything, a lot of that is just not it's not possible to stay in ancient times forever. It's natural that we grow, but I don't think we grew.
And yeah, I agree. I think that societally, socially, we've actually probably decayed socially. And this is something that I think people are afraid to be themselves. And I don't know if this has always been the case, because I wasn't alive in history to know this, but at least today, people are so afraid to be themselves. I don't know if it's because the idea that you might get canceled, or that there's cameras watching, or there's just technology everywhere, microphones listening, people just the way that the internet works is like, even your footprint in the physical world will somehow leave a digital footprint now, even though you don't have to do anything on the internet, yet you're still leaving a digital footprint. And so that almost can give you anxiety. It can make you afraid to express yourself freely, because it's just always going to be documented now on the internet. And people long for that social connection. I've noticed is that I know I have for a long time and didn't even realize it. But lately I've been going out with this like group of friends to just the pickleball courts and the sauna and stuff. And we'll just talk to everybody there. And once you crack people open, you realize they'll say to you, like, this is the best sauna experience I've ever had. It's usually never like this. And we're just like, we're glad, we're happy that that's the case. 'Cause it's making me realize that people long to be themselves.
For sure. People long to be themselves.
They want somebody want somebody to talk to them,
Yeah. We all long to kind of play our role. And I think we all long as humans to express ourselves in some way. And so that's why, I think art is like a great way that people do that. And, but art can take many forms, right? So whether you're a musician or a painter or a carpenter or, whatever, it's that same principle that like you want to express yourself in what you're doing, even if that's just dressing how you want to dress and, decorating your house the way you want to do it. But like we long for that for sure, to kind of explore and express ourselves as individuals.
Explore is a really good word that stood out to me, because whenever I'm in that sort of flow state of mind and just exploring my creativity and self-expression, a lot of it's not deliberate. It's a very exploratory process. It's not like I'm going to go deliberately express myself doing this. It's one of those things that you just start doing something and see where it takes you, For Whenever I try to deliberately do something, though, that's when it starts becoming you lose that flow state.
Yeah.
It no
For
longer
sure. I mean, in terms of flow state, the second you try to, do it deliberately, then you're not doing it naturally.
Yeah,
So
and that's like I sort of was thinking of flow state as the same thing as just being yourself. I was
yeah.
kind of referring to that as as expressing yourself freely.
Okay. Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Oh. Yeah. Well, I really do think people long for that, and that's why people are moving away from traditional media sources in favor of long form stuff where people are expressing themselves, where people want the depth of character, the depth of content, and I really do think we're kind of shifting back towards like a quality over quantity type mindset, for so long. And I don't think people want this, but it's corporations that have power and, these, I guess, government to some degree, but, the powers that be, kind of just push things in that direction where it's like as cheap as possible, as fast as possible, empty shell, like just and so
And there's no alternative also.
and there's no alternative, so they get to kind of dictate that, and so now people are kind of really longing for.
So it's like this facade that like you have freedom, you have the choice, but in reality, like the choice is either like it's like two choices from the same corporation. It's like you don't actually like with the like like you were saying, like Walmart or Target, like
Yeah,
it's
right.
just,
Yeah. Yeah, that's your expression. You get to choose if you'd like to go to Walmart or Target.
yeah,
Express yourself that way.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's just it's the sad truth though, man. It really is. I hate places like that. Like I was walking around, I rarely go to those types of stores, but I moved recently and my new house is near a Walmart and a Target, and you need stuff for a new house. And so I've been to both, and I'm walking around like Walmart, and it's just like, oh my God, like it's just aisles and aisles and aisles of bullshit. And it's just like, okay, a whole aisle of lamps and clocks and little stools, and it's all just cheap garbage. And it's just like, man, they really took everything, they took all these little industries and just consolidated them all into this big nasty place.
yeah. And it's such an artificial. You get the fluorescent lighting, the aisles, nothing about it. Like it's a place where like it will make you anxious. Like if you go there,
Yeah, it made me anxious. You're walking around and nothing makes sense. It's huge. There's people everywhere. Like you can't even stop for a second because there's people behind you, and like you don't know where anything is, and it's like, oh, I'm looking for duct tape. Like,
dude,
all right,
gotta, like
good fucking luck, and you're gonna wander through all these aisles of everything but duct tape.
yeah. I give up when I was looking for like a sleep mask once.
Yeah.
I gave up. I was like, I can't.
Right.
Dude, I can't find it. Like,
Exactly. It makes no sense, and they want you to do that. They want you to walk all around the store and look at everything and maybe find something else to buy while you're in there.
Yep. Yeah, dude. I find the only part of Walmart I find myself getting fascinated by, and it's because I never go, and it's only for like a minute. Is like when I walk by the video game section, I'm always like, ooh, what games are there? But
yeah, I don't even know. Do they even sell games like that anymore, or is it all just like you download it?
dude, yeah, most of it's just down. That's the thing. Yeah. It's like the only games that entice me are I download games for any other console except for Switch. The Nintendo Switch is the one I like to buy cartridges for because it's that nostalgic feel of the DS. Where
Yeah.
you pop the cartridge
Yeah,
in.
do they take cartridges like that? I've never actually.
You could download the game on just a drive, but
Yeah.
I like the cartridge.
Right. Yeah. You want to feel
Old fashioned.
blowing it when it's
Yeah.
popping in that old fashioned way.
Yeah. But yeah, dude, it's same with grocery shopping. Same thing, you know? You go and just walk through all these aisles and it's all of it is just
Oh
a
my
bunch of
God. I
BS.
make this argument all the time. It's you walk through the grocery store and it's 10 aisles of various crackers and breads. I mean, literally, like if you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to need something to eat real quick. Let me just run into the store and grab a few things. Let me run to Publix. Like, okay, this is crackers and nuts and more crackers, Ritz and Toll House, Pepperidge
Cheez-Its.
Farm, and Cheez-Its, and like, oh
Yes,
my
dude.
God, every 50 cereals that are all poison.
Yeah, they all just
and
have like glyphosate in them and
everything. And
just a bunch of other chemicals.
20, I mean, it's all bread and crackers and cookies. And then there's like produce and meat. Like the grocery store could be so much smaller
Yeah.
if it was actually just like the food that, produce, meat, refrigerated,
Like real food.
dairy. Like, of course, you need some dry goods, but like the whole damn thing is dry goods.
Yeah. Dude, yeah, they have a whole aisle just for chips.
Yeah.
A whole entire row. It's like
Right.
and yeah, another thing is that it's all so much of it is poison. It's not good for you in terms of the macros in it, but also just the chemicals in it. It's
Yeah, even without the chemicals, it wouldn't be nutritious.
Yeah.
But with the chemicals, it's like, it's not only not nutritious, it's actually kind of toxic. Like, especially I've been seeing a lot lately with the cereal, but cereal's not special. It's in everything. I mean, it's in the produce. It's in, I mean, anything that's,
cereal.
yeah, cereal is one thing that's been getting a lot of attention lately because in America there's ingredients in cereal that are illegal in Europe and other countries.
I've
So
heard that.
if you want to buy Fruit Loops in Europe, they have different ingredients because American Fruit Loops, and I don't know Fruit Loops, but I'm sure it
I
is.
think Lucky Charms is one
Yeah,
of those.
it is. I'm sure they're all that way, but right, like some of the ingredients that are in our version, they're not legal because they're just known to be toxic and poisonous, and so the European version doesn't have them in it. But then why the fuck do we have it in ours? Why? What is the purpose? If you can
Right.
make the Fruit Loops without it and you can sell them in Europe,
Right.
then
It's
why
like-
is it in our version? And that's the same thing that's everywhere. But like I just saw a good example. It might have been Lucky Charms or Fruit Loops or whatever, but guy goes to the store and he pulls the box of cereal and he's looking at the back and he's like, okay, ingredients. And one of the ingredients is trisodium phosphate. Okay, trisodium phosphate. He goes, all right, now let's go to Home Depot. And he goes to Home Depot and he goes to the aisle where it's floor stripper and cleaner. Trisodium phosphate. A bottle of trisodium phosphate. It's used to clean floors, like to strip paint off a floor. It's
that's
legitimately
disturbing.
a toxin.
Yeah.
It's in the fucking cereal.
And
He's
you think,
like,
what is the incentive? I
right.
wonder.
Well,
Is it like a
I could speculate.
preservative
I don't
or-
know what that particular chemical is doing, whether it's a preservative or
Anti-stale, like keeps
yeah.
it,
I
like,
mean,
just
it
some sort
could
of
be some
preservative, like-
bullshit like that, but a lot of it is that they just want to make it. Well, they don't care. So, right, like if they want to make it red and yellow, then they put these crazy dyes. They don't care if it's toxic.
Yeah. They don't want it to be gray though.
Yeah, and then a lot of the time they actually put stuff in the food just to make it more addictive, like just to make it habit forming.
They'll be like, they'll put labels on it like 0 sugars, but they'll have this artificial sweetener that's like 100 times sweeter than sugar in it.
And probably
like-
worse. Yeah,
Probably worse and more addictive. It's
right.
Like,
And they've got everybody thinking
it's
that,
like 1 gram of erythritol. Meanwhile, erythritol is like so much more potent than sugar is per gram.
yeah, and we all just think, well, oh, it's on the shelf, so that means it's past the testing, right? Like I'm guilty of this. People all do it, right? Like you go to the grocery store and you walk into an aisle and there's like a box of granola bars or something, and you're like, okay, yeah, looks good. You just assume that because that box is on the shelf in your grocery store being legally sold in the United States, you assume that that's food. You
Right.
assume that it has been
Has nutrients.
evaluated by, it was made in a safe, clean way, and the ingredients are safe and known to be, safe. And so you just make that assumption that, like, if this food is being sold on my shelf, that not only has it been prepared in a clean, manner, hygienic, but it's also, made with, there's not rat poison in my food,
Yeah,
and that's actually a false assumption. Like, you just think, oh yeah, I mean, the FDA is, if they're allowing this to be here, then it must be fine. I mean, I don't think anybody thinks, Lucky Charms are healthy, but you assume that if it's allowed to be sold in your store, that it's at least, it's just sugary or whatever, but
Yeah.
it's much more than that. It's, it's
Right.
actually quite sinister.
It really is. And that's why I was thinking I've been starting to try to buy healthier foods and spend a little bit more money on organic items for
You
the
got to.
pesticides, because I've been eating healthy for a while, but I've just recently been like, if I'm going to eat healthy, why am I still not eating the organic option?
Oh, yeah.
Or looking up brands that at least, like, I'll look up brands of what I was eating like a month ago, and it was like, yes, this contains glyphosate, this contains atrazine, all these like
Crazy.
pesticides, weed killers, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
why don't I just spend a couple dollars more and just get the organic? Because, and I've noticed that I think I've actually been feeling a lot better, my stomach, in terms of things like, whereas I don't know if it's been, I've noticed that if I go back to unhealthy things, the more and more healthier I get, then when I eat something that's unhealthy, the more it wrecks my stomach, because
For sure.
you just start getting used to not having these toxins in you
Yeah.
that your digestive tract and your microbiome all got used to. It
Well-
ravages your stomach. It's insane.
Yeah, and it works on the flip side too, where, if you're if you're unhealthy and
yeah.
and you eat fast food all the time, then when you go to, McDonald's and you get your Big Mac and you eat that with your fucking giant soda, it doesn't even make you feel any different because you're just used to it. So you don't even know, or you're not even aware that, like, oh, this is making me feel terrible, because like you're just so used to it. Like, so the more that you're eating healthy, the more you realize that, like, oh wow, when I eat this is having a very negative effect on my body. This is, causing me GI issues or joint pain or whatever, what have you, right? But then all the alternative is, if you're eating like shit all the time, then like you don't even notice.
Yeah, you get me. I think what I would suspect is that it probably has to do with your microbiome just evolving to be, to just be acclimated to those types of foods. And then when you realize when you stop eating them, your microbiome probably changes to a much more how base version of what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then when you eat something unhealthy again, it shocks it, and it's like it doesn't know how to handle it. Like,
and it's just a simple, problem of tolerance too, that like if you're on any type of medication or caffeine or anything, right? Like if you don't drink coffee if you don't drink coffee for 6 months, you have a half a cup of coffee, you're going to be like, whoa, I feel like, but if you have coffee every day, if you have coffee every day, then like you don't even notice, right?
Yeah.
Like I can drink this tea,
alcohol,
right?
It's like directly a toxic thing.
It's all the same.
You do it every day, then your stomach's going to get used to it. Whereas if you don't drink, then you don't have that tolerance.
Yeah. Well, alcohol is one of the craziest things that we allow, that is just
purely
just toxic.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
it's like literally a neurotoxin. It's, it's so bad for you, yet there's the one that is, it's the one that they give you the pass
it's
on.
allowed and normalized and celebrated by, many. But yeah, I mean, it's just complete poison. There's really, actually no benefits whatsoever from it.
Right.
I mean,
Like not even like nicotine. You can find benefits from nicotine,
Yeah.
and it's still, I think there's some nootropic effects with low doses of
Sure.
nicotine, but again, there's trade-offs. But alcohol purely has,
nothing. There's
Yeah.
nothing there that's benefiting you in any way. And then it's crazy too, because like I would say a good half the time or more, it doesn't even make you feel good. So
Yeah.
it's not even like, oh, the trade-off is like, it's so bad in every way, but like, but you feel good. Like, well, kinda, but like, can also make you feel really fucking bad. Like,
Yeah,
you can get sick, and then after the fact, you're ravaged and hungover, and it's like, God, it's really, I mean, that's why I never really have, drank here and there, but it's why I never drank.
for me, I feel like it's one of those things where the more aware I became as an individual, and just like through, I don't know, meditation or just becoming aware, like growing up, becoming an aware person
Yeah.
and not tuning out the things in life that bother me and taking on responsibility. The more aware and mature I've become, the more I've realized how alcohol doesn't enhance my experience of life. It actually makes it worse. Whereas when I was younger and less aware and obviously just naive and ignorant and thought I was aware at the time, I would drink and I thought it was great because I paid less attention to the things that mattered and more to just how I feel up here only, and not as a being, as an entire being,
Yeah.
When you really get in tune with your mind and your body, you realize that alcohol is like one of the actual worst drugs there is. There's so many other drugs that are way more addictive and feel way better. It's like, it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. If you're going to, I mean, if you're going to do something, that is one thing that is certainly not good for you in any way. I mean, it's really not worth it. And it's just pushed on people that not only do they feel like it's normal, but like they also feel like it's not normal if you don't drink. Like,
Right.
People in high school, especially when you're just, coming of age, right? People think like, like they think they have to drink because this is what people do. People drink, and they
It's like,
view it as like they've got it's not normal if they're not drinking.
yeah,
And
like on the weekend, if you don't go out, what are you gonna do?
what are you, a loser?
You're gonna stay home and read a book?
Right.
Like what?
But that's just that's a toxic culture. And thankfully that doesn't exist everywhere. But, for folks your age and, even younger and older, right? Like, college age or high school age or, even adults, especially around the colleges and everything, that's the prevailing mindset is that like,
Drinking is a big part of like
that's
life.
like the whole goal. And
Yeah, it's like, what are you gonna do on the weekend? It's like, we're gonna go out, and then it's not like, I don't do that anymore because there's nothing there for me. Like I want something more. That's not an experience. I don't remember the experience. It's not worthwhile. It's like, I just don't find it valuable to me. I don't want to do it. I mean, there is something valuable about time with friends for sure, but going out just to drink, it's not really, man. See, I guess, I don't know. I like haven't done it in so long, but when I did, those aren't the memories that I remember,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would much rather do things that are going to benefit me in some way. I mean, even if that's, I don't know, even if you're kind of cutting loose, if you will, right? Like it should at least be something that's going to, like, going out with friends could be something that's positive and
you could find people. It's good to try to find people who are more on your same page, because you don't have to go out and drink. There's other ways to cut loose, right? It's good to try to find other ways to cut loose
for sure.
And suspend your free time, because it's really, drinking is really just a substitution. It's just a distraction from having nothing better to do, having no hobbies or no sort of direction or passions or desires in life.
Mm-hmm.
Like if that's in your free time, it's like, all right, I guess I'm just going to go to the bar it's because you don't have anything else. Whereas if, say, you're a musician and in your free time, all you want to do is go play with your band, that's different. That's real, you know?
Exactly. That's a great example. It's very much a substitution. It's just like well, we're going to do nothing, but this will make doing nothing better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's like we'll just, and you don't want to actually think about anything better to do because that requires effort and energy.
yeah.
And that could go back to the idea of technology and AI and stuff taking away people's ability to think and use their mind. But then again, I don't know, because drinking's been an issue for forever. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just like on a fundamental human level, almost on a spiritual level, it's that battle between like
The id and the super ego.
yeah,
sort
or
of.
like the battle between like doing what's right and doing what's easy, you know? And so people gravitate towards doing what's easy. And it requires no effort to drink and be a degenerate.
And it makes them miserable though, because I heard Jordan Peterson say this, but it's a brilliant idea. But doing what you want and getting what you want when you want it, anytime you want, is not what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't seem like it, but that's not what you actually want in life.
Right.
What you want is responsibility. You want to shoulder some sort of burden and take on challenges and be an active player in life.
Right. That's what people get satisfaction out of is being actively engaged in something that brings them, purpose or solving problems,
Challenging things.
overcoming challenges, growing, producing something,
Right. If you ask someone what the most meaningful thing is in their life, if it's not their kids, and oftentimes it will be the most difficult thing they've done in their life. And that's what they attribute the most meaning to. You can ask someone like the hardest thing they ever did, and they could tell you it was becoming a Navy SEAL. And there's so much meaning in that. Well, why? Because it's challenging and because you respect yourself for putting yourself through that challenge and overcoming it. And it's like, that applies to almost everybody. If you ask, nobody's going to say, oh, that time that I got really, fucked up. And like, that's not the most meaningful part of their life. Or just
No.
the easy things. Those
Right.
fall out of question immediately.
Yeah, for sure. People think about the struggles they've overcome. That's what we get satisfaction out of, putting in the time, making the sacrifices to graduate, to pass that training or, what have you. And so, but, we're taught the opposite. So that's why I think a lot of people don't even know what they really want. Like you said, getting what you want when you want all the time is not actually what people want, but we're sort of conditioned to think that that's what we want. So, when people are, working and, or students, they're in school, and then when they have free time, it's like, what do they do during that free time? Well, their brain is just like, oh, well, go out and drink. Well, why? But because that's what they've got in their mind is like, well, that's what I want to do, like
Yeah.
I want to, but really a lot of the times it's on a deeper level. It's not what they really want to do. It's just what they think. Like it's like people want to get away with it. They want to get away with something. It's like the allure of doing what you're not supposed to do.
Right. And people are losing, I feel like people are losing the desire to want to do challenging things. It's like, if I want to do something, it should feel good and be sort of hedonistic and be a cut loose. It should, it should feel instantly rewarding, instantly gratifying. Whereas that's the people, like some people, I feel like that's how most people are now. Whereas in history and just or when you look at athletes or very accomplished people, the things they want to do are things that are challenging and it's hard to train your brain to do that, especially with the world that we live in where there's instant gratification everywhere. And so,
Right.
right, like you were saying, you're taught to believe that what you want is something that's instantly gratifying and
Right.
not something that's derived out of putting yourself through a challenging environment.
Right. You're taught that, oh yeah, like, you know, I'm going to skip school today, like, or like I'm going to, whatever the bad thing is, like that's what we gravitate towards, because it's almost like you think that that's what you want to do because you're not allowed to do it. And it's not even on a conscious level a lot of the time, it's like, and I think that that's how, people that fall into addiction, a lot of the time it can start that way, where it's like,
Right.
we both know people who it's like, the second they get the chance to go do something bad, they do because they feel like, like, oh, like
That's
this
where
this
the
is my
adventure
opportunity.
is.
Yeah, this is my opportunity to go do this bad thing and get away with it. And they don't really actually want to do that. Like, it's not going to actually bring them satisfaction. It's not even really something that aligns with their goals or their plans, or it's just kind of like a opportunistic, like, oh, like mom and dad aren't looking, like I can go,
Yeah.
like I'm thinking like teenagers and stuff, that I can sneak out, like whatever it is. And so,
Yeah. I think what it stems from is probably this deep desire to long for something more that you don't have. You don't fill any sort of position or role in your life. Kind of back to what we were saying earlier, is you long for this desire for something more, and you think that adventure is through breaking the rules rather than taking on responsibility.
yeah, for sure. And we all, is again, this kind of is a circle back to like what we really feel satisfied when we're doing is exploring and expressing ourselves. And if you don't have something that you're able to do that through, right? Like if you're an artist or a musician, those are great ways. Or if you're an athlete, or right, there's any number of things that you could do to express and explore. But people end up doing that through like drugs. They do drugs, and it's like they feel that they're exploring and expressing their, a different part of them. I think that that's something too that comes into play, is
Right.
people think that
But it's not the better part of them, though,
no, it's not. It's an illusion. It's
really
not
is.
really. It's not a way to explore or express yourself. It's just this illusion that, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna, it's gonna. I don't know. I mean,
He's gonna give you something more.
right.
than,
It's
like,
gonna change your mindset and give you something more. But it's not true.
Right. It's not. Yeah. So,
This morning, so get this, this morning I obviously I have my cats. I have two cats, and so they are naughty and at night they'll chase each other around and like knock stuff over, and so they'll be too rough, and so sometimes I have to like either lock them in the other room, or I have like a large crate that I'll put them in sometimes. And it's very odd. Usually you would do that for a dog, but I actually
Yeah.
do it for my cats. And this morning, my cat Betty peed in the cage, and she came out. It was all over her, like soaking wet. Like it literally looked like she just came in out of a pool.
That sucks.
So I took her and had to give her a bath at like 7 a.m., like scrubbing her down.
Damn, dude.
Yeah.
You wonder, do animals care about that, or do they?
Oh,
just...
I'm sure she was not. I felt bad. I mean, I wish
Yeah.
usually that's never happened. I mean, we've got a good routine by now. Like they know their nighttime routine.
Yeah, that
That type
sucks,
of thing
dude.
doesn't happen. But
Does she hate baths or?
I mean, she's a cat, so,
Yeah,
but
she doesn't like them too much.
get her in there and scrub her down.
Yep.
But I thought that was pretty funny. I was doing that this morning, and crazy business.
Yeah. So how has everything been going at work lately? I haven't really asked you.
Work.
So are you still doing the GIS stuff?
Yeah, I do GIS, but I don't. It's not the main responsibility. So what I'm a land acquisition agent, so I mostly work on negotiations of land deals where we actually purchase land outright, fee simple, or
For the state of Florida, right?
for the state of Florida. Yep. So I work for the state. I represent the state. And so, the state of Florida has a robust land acquisition program. We're very well funded. And so we're always looking to acquire land, mostly for conservation purposes. So we're looking to acquire land to create new managed areas like state parks and state forests or wildlife management areas. Or we're looking to build on to existing managed areas. And then we buy conservation easements too. So conservation easement is an instrument that essentially allows us to purchase certain rights associated with the property to protect it, but we don't actually take title to that land. So if we acquire a conservation easement over a property, we might purchase the development rights. So let's say, and this is very common and popular right now, that Mr. Joe has a big farm, and maybe farm's not the right word. He has a large property, 1,000 acres, and it's mostly natural, right? He doesn't want to sell it. Undeveloped. Yep. So he might not want to sell it, but he might be interested in selling us a conservation easement, in which case we would negotiate. So what rights does he want to continue to retain? So maybe he engages in hunting and fishing on the property. Maybe he has engages in silviculture, which is harvesting of timber according to best management practices. So timber can be harvested in sustainable ways that are actually not that destructive. So silviculture is kind of like the term for responsible harvesting of timber and cultivation of timber. So that's a big one. But let's say he wants to keep doing those things. So when we're buying a conservation easement, we'll purchase like the development rights. So we'll create this legal document that basically says you're selling us the development rights associated with this property. There'll be all the prohibited uses. You cannot subdivide this property. You cannot build on it. You can't, a very lengthy list of prohibited uses. And then the retained rights is whatever we allow them to keep doing. Maybe he can keep doing his silviculture, or he can keep doing the hunting and fishing. And so depending on the rights that he's keeping and the rights that we're buying, that will affect the value, and we'll make an offer for that. So we'll protect land that way, protect it from development or conversion to more intense land use. And then of course we buy land outright to add on to existing managed areas and to create new ones.
Yeah. So with that type of the easement, what's it called again?
Conservation easement.
Conservation easement. With that, could you technically buy, say he had just a little house on this piece of land, but owned a lot of land. Could you buy out his land and let him keep his house and his little, but just maybe not build anymore or develop anymore, and he could sell those rights and still live there and on that property, but you guys technically own the development rights to it?
That's exactly right. So that's very common. That's actually most of the time what we do. So,
So he can sell his land but still get to stay there.
right,
Sort of.
because he's not actually selling the land. He's selling us certain rights associated with the land.
Okay.
So if you own a piece of property, and let's say that you own everything associated with that property. So you own the land, you own the surface rights, you own the subsurface rights and the mineral rights, and you can basically do whatever you want to do out there. Now, when we buy a conservation easement, a good example is one that I recently did where, it was about 600-acre property. The majority of the property was in a natural state. There's a small cabin on part of the property, and they use it for hunting. They go hunting out there. It's sort of like a little hunt camp. The building is, and they have some small areas where they harvest pine. Some areas of pine plantations. So relatively low intensity land use. And so this gentleman came, and we purchased an easement over that land. So he's allowed to continue to hunt and fish and use the hunt camp and continue to harvest the pines according to best management practices, but he's not allowed to construct any new structures or expand the existing structure. But otherwise, he owns the property. He could sell the property. He could stay there. But we've just basically purchased some of the rights. So it's good for it's a good tool for us because we really want to conserve land. We really want to protect, these large tracts from being developed in the ways that we were previously talking about with, this unsustainable development where, people will develop these communities and they'll build all these houses as close together as possible. And it's just a environmental nightmare and oftentimes done very irresponsibly. And of course, Florida is one of the fastest growing states. So we've got all this demand for more development, and that puts immense strain on our wildlife and, on our ecosystem because these things are all connected. So overdevelopment greatly impacts our water quality, like not only our beaches, but like our drinking water, like we were talking about. So there's a lot of reasons why it's important, but a lot of ranching families and families that have been in Florida for a long time, they might not want to sell these generational properties, but they might be open to selling certain rights associated with the property, and they can continue to use the land. So it's a good middle ground. It's a great strategy that was developed, some decades ago. It was an innovative way to conserve more land. So yeah, we buy land outright, and we also do easements. And then I do GIS is a great tool to basically help with that. GIS is a tool. It's a skill set that can be used for anything. You can use GIS to do real estate analysis, or you can use GIS to model the flow of traffic or, model wildfires or anything, right? Like, when you call 911, GIS is used to, help find out where you are and dispatch the nearest officers to you and stuff like that. So even Google Maps is technically a GIS, and all the addresses are stored features that are in that geospatial model, essentially. So it's really helpful for real estate.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. You don't realize it, but when you buy a house, you technically aren't buying the entire property. You're not buying all the property rights, because you were saying consider somebody who owns the mineral rights, the land rights, whatever, all the rights, Mm-hmm. And when you buy a piece of property, typically are people not buying the whole property as it is? They're buying just some rights to it.
Generally, no. Generally, if you're buying a piece of property, you are buying all the rights.
Okay.
So, I just bought a house, And so I own the house and I own the land, and I pretty much have all the rights. I mean, now where this comes into where this can be different is if you live in a community with deed restrictions or like an HOA. So in a lot of suburban areas, it'll be the way that it works is there's one parent parcel. So there'll be a large tract of land, a parcel of land, and a developer will create a plat, it's called, which is a survey, basically a drawing, a sketch that shows what they're going to do, the development plan. Like, okay, here's the parcel. We're going to cut it up into 100 individual lots, and here's how the roads are going to be, and this and that, right? And so in those instances, if you buy a house in that neighborhood, you're buying the house and the land for your lot, but you're actually still in the parent parcel that was subdivided. So there's often deed restrictions. Like if I live in a neighborhood, like I can't just build a chicken coop in my front yard, because even though I own that property, when I purchased it with restrictions on the deed. So I don't have all the rights, right?
Mm-hmm. And you'd have to get permission.
You'd have to get permission in that case, but that's mostly not what at work, we don't do residential stuff. I don't.
Yeah.
And so where we mostly run into this is in rural areas. A lot of times the surface and subsurface rights have been severed. So what that means is that some point in the past, a person owned a piece of property and they sold the mineral rights, the oil, gas, and mineral rights. So, I could, own this farm and I could sell the mineral rights to an oil company, and, maybe they would come drill, but I own the land still. And so a lot of times in Florida, there's very few areas that actually have, that are productive for oil. So mostly there's not drilling, but a lot of times that's what we see is that, I'll sell somebody the land, but I'll reserve the mineral rights for myself. So it's like, I'm going to sell you my land, but I'm only selling you the surface rights. I'm not selling you the mineral rights. So then you've got the land and I've got the mineral rights. You could sell that land 10 times and 100 years can go by, and the land has changed hands all those times, but I've still got the mineral rights.
And so you can't drill on that land, or they can't drill on that land, only you can because you own the mineral rights?
That's right. Yep. So that's just an interesting thing that comes up when we're buying land. But
that is interesting. So
mostly we want to buy all the rights. So, we don't, if there's a property that we're looking to buy, and there's we call it OGM, oil, gas, mineral. So if the oil, gas, and mineral rights have been reserved to a third party, that means we can't. If we buy the land, we're not getting the mineral rights with it. We try to avoid that because that could undermine the conservation value of what we're doing. And then of course, if we are buying a portion of a piece of land to add to a state park, we don't want Exxon to be able to come and drill. That just wouldn't, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So that's something we see a lot.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, and before this job, you were doing very similar stuff, right?
Yeah, before this exact role, I was doing more GIS. So, in Florida, the way that our land acquisition program works is it's called the Florida Forever program. And so, the Florida Forever program has, it's administered by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And that it involves establishing long-term, large-scale planning boundaries called, project boundaries, essentially. So we have a list of existing Florida Forever projects. It's a priority list. And that list has been put together over time But what we're doing now is we add to that list and it's a willing seller program. So landowners will apply, they'll submit applications that they want to try to sell their land to the state, or they want to get an easement on their land. So they'll apply to have their land added to the list, either as a new project or as a boundary amendment to an existing project. And so that's what I was doing previously, was kind of managing new proposals and doing GIS work to kind of support that, where we would get applications from landowners and partner groups, land trusts, and other conservation organizations that are bringing us proposals. And, I would be involved in helping to analyze the land from an environmental perspective and from, a geospatial side, then facilitating the government process to get it added to the list. Now what I'm doing is working on actually acquiring land that's on the list. So when something gets added to the list, it's just eligible for acquisition. So if you have 1,000 acres, you apply to the Florida Forever program. You say, I want to get added as a new project. It's the Jack Ranch, right? Mm-hmm. And so you do that. You apply. The process involves, an environmental analysis. We go out there with, biologists and ecologists, and they look at the land cover and the species, and they evaluate the habitat and basically the resource value. And they put together a whole report on, what's out there and the value from an environmental standpoint of that land. And then that gets brought to the state's Acquisition and Restoration Council, which is a government body of members appointed by the governor, who their job is to look at these proposals and basically approve them or deny them. And so if Jack Ranch goes to it's ARC, Acquisition Restoration Council, ARC. So if we do all the work, we do the analysis, and then we bring the report to ARC, and ARC gets to say, they get to vote yes or no on whether to add your ranch to the priority list. So if they vote yes, then we add Jack Ranch, goes on the list, and now we draw that boundary, and we preserve these boundaries. And so now your land is eligible for acquisition. So that doesn't mean that we're going to buy it right away, right, but it's eligible.
So you're basically creating a map of eligible lands and bordering it all out. And so you have a sort of a visual representation of what you're working with.
Yes.
And what you're able to protect and
what's already protected.
So you can visually see it.
And so that's where GIS really comes into play.
Were there ways to also, like, on this land, was it like coded so that you could see this one's more important than this one? Like, we want this one more than this piece of land right here.
Yeah, so that's the idea behind the priority list. So when you get added to the list, you don't just get added randomly on the list. So the list is split into 5 categories, depending on sort of the type of project. There's critical natural lands, there's climate change lands, there's critical historical resources, there's substantially complete projects, and there's partnerships and regional incentives. And then there's actually one more, less than fee, which is conservation easements. So it'll get added to the subcategory, and then every year in December, we do a ranking where we rank all the projects by priority. So then each year, that list, throughout the year, we're adding to the list as, new projects come in. And then at the end of the year, it all gets re-ranked. So we rank them according to priority, and that analysis to determine priority, it involves GIS analysis of resources, connectivity. So a big thing is like, a piece of land that's completely isolated is going to be much less attractive, for the state to acquire as compared to that same parcel if it's surrounded by state forest on 3 sides already. So we're big on connectivity.
Yeah.
So
you want to sort of bridge the gap between pieces of land you already own.
Exactly, because
yeah,
the goal is to create wildlife corridors, and like greenways and corridors, so that wildlife can move freely through as much range as possible. So, because obviously now we've got so much development all across the state that these little pockets of forest and habitat are oftentimes isolated. And so we're really focused on kind of bridging those gaps to connect them and create these corridors.
It's got to be a connected graph would be ideal.
Exactly.
Rather than just colonies of...
For sure, because a lot of species can't survive that way. And, the Florida panther is kind of the sentinel example, is that, Florida panthers have been constrained to a very small habitat range in Southwest Florida. So mostly all the Florida panthers that are alive, I think there's only about 200, they estimate, that are actually alive. And they're coming back from the brink of extinction. In the 70s, there was only a handful of them left.
Yeah, it was like
I remember
maybe
looking
3
that or something.
Yeah, it was really low. Below 20. I think it was very
it was
low.
Below 20. Yeah. So, but anyway, so due to hunting in of the panthers and loss of habitat and everything, they've been shrunk down to live in this little pocket of the Everglades mostly, and they can roam outside of that, but mostly they're all concentrated down in Southwest Florida. And a male Florida panther actually really requires 200 square miles of territory. They roam a lot and they need to be able to move. And of course they need to eat, right? So the big thing is now trying to create corridors for the panther to keep moving north, so they can keep moving. And if we can create a wildlife corridor for the panther that can move north into other managed areas and expand their territory into new habitats where there's more food, less pressure, because especially in the Everglades, we've got an infestation of pythons, which are an invasive species. It's not native to Florida, and the pythons have effectively eaten and exterminated all food sources in the Everglades. So basically, there's no mammals anymore, or very few. There used to be deer and rabbits and raccoons, and of course there are still some, but those populations have seen massive decline because the pythons are eating everything, and it actually makes it so there's no food for the panthers and for other species that are native. So that's a big focus is to try to create corridors for the panther. We're really active right now in that Southwest Florida area, working on some really big acquisitions. I think we actually just closed on a really big one that will probably be publicly announced pretty soon, if not already.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
That's really cool work because it's like I always wondered what people do who get environmental science, who sort of go that route, and what, like, as an environmental scientist, what does that mean? Because I'm thinking, I know. And same with other natural sciences like marine biology. And that's a very cool applied example of how the state of Florida is working to protect lands. And I'm sure there's a lot of other projects going on. And this is just the land acquisition end of things.
Yep. So I work for the Division of State Lands. And so that's what we do. We work on the acquisition and the management of state-owned lands. And so that's kind of our focus. But within the environmental science umbrella, there is so much work that can be done and so different, right? Like previously, before I got into this, I was working for a different organization, a regulatory organization within the government still, and our focus was it was the Aquifer Protection Program. So, back to drinking water, was focused on protecting underground sources of drinking water. It's called USDW, underground source of drinking water. And so, the aquifer is our primary source of drinking water in Florida. And there's areas where the aquifer is confined, which means that there is sediment, layers of sediment over the aquifer that are not porous. So water cannot migrate in or out of that portion of the aquifer. It's confined. Basically, like if there's clay, like a hard clay layer kind of confining that portion of the aquifer. But there's other areas like south of Tallahassee here. There's a region known as the Woodville Karst Plain. And it's the aquifer is unconfined there, which means that it interacts with the surface directly in many places through springs and sinkholes. So, obviously a spring is where the aquifer is emerging from the ground, and a sinkhole is the opposite, where it's kind of a direct conduit into the aquifer from the surface. And so those areas are areas where the aquifer and the underground sources of drinking water are especially vulnerable, because if a diesel truck is driving down the highway, within the Woodville Karst Plain, and they tip over and spill 10,000 gallons of diesel into the ground, well, the aquifer is not confined. So that's going to seep right down into the drinking water and contaminate the drinking water. And so what I used to do was to try to mitigate that. There's a whole, I don't know, without getting too far into it, there's this whole concept of deep injection wells. So it's, you usually think of a well as a way that you're extracting water from the aquifer, but a deep injection well is like the reverse. And it's a way that wastewater, known as effluent, can be disposed of without harming the drinking water, ideally. So what they actually do is they'll drill a well very deep into the aquifer, deep down. And this all depends on the specific geology of the site and the content of the effluent, the wastewater. But they'll actually inject that wastewater deep underground, where it can, and it's treated before it's treated to a certain standard before it's injected underground. But the idea is if they just took that wastewater and sprayed it on the surface or dumped it into a pond, right, it would contaminate our surface water, or it would seep down and contaminate the drinking water. But if they inject it very deep underground, it'll actually remain confined down there and won't be able to migrate upward into the sources of drinking water, which are generally less deep. And now I'm not really a super expert on that. I did that for a short time, but I'm much more interested in land acquisition and real estate, and especially like conservation real estate.
Yeah. Did you learn anything about how aquifers form? Because it's crazy to think they're below everywhere. They're below all the land. There's all this water just flowing between these in these aquifers.
Yeah.
How in the world do these tunnels form, and is it just like some geological process, or that happens slowly over time?
Yeah, it is. And, again, it depends on where you are. But in Florida, we have a calcareous limestone. We have a lot of limestone in our subsurface. So that's made of calcium, partly. And so that's the thing, is Florida is like a remnant reef structure, essentially, like hundreds of thousands of years ago. most of Florida was underwater, and the center, there's a geologic formation called the Lake Wales Ridge, and that runs right through the center of the state of Florida, north to south. And it's like this ridge, and it's a ridge of high elevation where the highest points in Florida are found, and it's very sandy. And at one point, that was actually a chain of islands. That was the only part of the state that was above water. The rest was under the ocean.
Wow.
So it's still there, and it's elevated. So anyway, the Lake Wales Ridge. I guess my point was that Florida is built up. It's built up out of calcium because we were effectively a former coral reef, and we were under sea, and so these organisms with calcareous tests, they're called, like foraminifera, these little microscopic sea creatures that die and create these layers of calcium that over thousands of years create this limestone. And so anyway, then now we're exposed as this is all above water, and when it rains, because we were talking about areas where the aquifers confined or unconfined, that rainwater, that runoff penetrates through porous sediment and drains down. So when it rains, for example, when it rains in a parking lot, that water does not absorb down because it's impermeable. It just pools up and has to run off into the drain. Mm-hmm. But if you're in a field, that water gets sucked underground, because mm-hmm. it penetrates through that porous sediment. And so where does it go? Well, it depends on the geology of where you are, but it seeps down into these, these areas. And because the rainwater is generally acidic and the limestone is made of calcium, it creates an acid-based reaction and actually carves these tunnels
as it's flowing down
over time. And so then, of course, due to elevation and pressure and all these other things, that water moves through the system and creates new pathways and flows through these existing caves.
And so I'm guessing like the tunnels over time get wider and wider as the water continues flowing through it.
Yup, and some of them, they change, and sometimes they collapse, and we really, a lot of it's poorly understood because
it's seems like it takes probably millions of years for this process to occur.
It does.
Hard to analyze.
It's hard to map it out. So there's some areas where we know what the what the cave systems look like, because, well, actually the way we know is that we do two ways. We send divers down there that are actually like crazy brave, and they dive into these sinkholes and caves and traverse through the caverns to map out where they go.
And what if there's like a current that sweeps you away?
Oh, they die a lot. It's extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
But of course, there's limits to that. So, over time, certain areas of the underground conduits are mapped, but only what we can know about. Another way is through dye studies. So they'll inject fluorescent dye into one sinkhole, and then they'll see where it emerges in other sinkholes. So, here Wakulla Springs is, Wakulla Springs is one of the largest, if not the largest, freshwater artesian spring in the world, and by volume. And so, the cave system down there is crazy. And so it's been mapped, and some of the studies they've done have, they'll take some of that fluorescent dye and they'll inject it into a sinkhole or a spring or a conduit somewhere, north of Wakulla, like in Woodville, and then they'll see, does that dye make its way to Wakulla Springs? And so they've been able to prove that, like, a lot of these little sinkholes around here, they all connect to the same system. So they use dyes to do that as well. But That's very dangerous. These cave divers are something
Yeah,
else.
dude. Imagine you swim down there and you might have like a safety rope, and then all of a sudden, like you lose your grip, you like slip off into a current, and you just can't catch the rope, and you just get
Yeah.
sucked into darkness.
Well, a lot of times too, what
Oh,
happens is like if sediment gets stirred up, then it can reduce
yeah,
visibility greatly, and then you don't even know where you are, and um, that's a big issue. Um, but it's kind of crazy, like there can be a cave diver deep underground within the conduits of the aquifer, and they could be like underneath a Sonny's barbecue. Like,
yeah,
you don't know. Like, so that's pretty crazy. But
that is.
I don't do that much. I don't really work on that type of stuff anymore. But it's all related and it's all relevant because one of the main reasons that we try to acquire land for conservation, it's not only to protect the plants and animals, but it's like we were saying with the surface water runoff. So when there's all this development, that water can't penetrate into the ground. That water is falling on concrete, and rooftops, and it's runoff. So that runoff is becoming polluted with oils and heavy metals, and believe it or not, prescription pharmaceuticals find their way into our water all the time. And so you just got to think like water is running down the street, becoming contaminated, and then that goes, into these stormwater drains, and ultimately, best case scenario, it's treated and causes minimal damage. But in Florida, we're having, red tide and this blue-green algae, which is really a cyanobacteria. And that's caused a lot by, too much nutrients in the runoff, whether that be from farming operations that use, fertilizer in a way that's, excessive, or really just widespread fertilizer use in these agricultural areas around Lake Okeechobee, create a lot of runoff, and then that gets diverted out into east and west, and on the coast then they get red tide and fish kills, and it pollutes the water big time. So we try to acquire land for that purpose too. But so this kind of comes back to the priority list. Each project that we put together has its own sort of purpose, right? So I was saying there's different categories on the list, right? So one of those categories is climate change lands. Most of the projects in that project category focus on coastal salt marshes and areas around the coast that we want to acquire for enhanced resilience and coastal protection. But there's other areas that the purpose of the project is we want to buy land to protect the aquifer and mitigate runoff and stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And I was thinking, this is kind of this was going back to when you said Florida used to be underwater and used to be a reef. So did all of Florida used to be this one giant elevated area underwater that was like it was more elevated than the deep ocean? So was it like one giant reef structure where there was all this life and stuff, or was it deep, you think?
To be honest, I don't know exactly, but I can say this much at least, right? The Gulf of Mexico in its present day is mostly not that deep,
Right.
for a long time.
Could have been much more
it's
similar to that.
right. So there's already like a
Just like the flats.
there's like the shelf, the continental shelf, right? It's called, I think. And so it's like underground right now, or not underground, undersea. There's already areas where it's plateau of more or less the certain depth, and then you get these deep areas where it transitions into deeper water. On the Atlantic Ocean, on that side, that happens much quicker. So in South Florida, the continental shelf is very close to shore. So you can go near like Broward County, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, You can launch your boat from there. You can travel just a few miles offshore. You could still see the land, and you could be in extremely deep water, catching deep water species, doing like deep sea fishing, and you're only a short distance from the actual land, a couple miles. Whereas in Jacksonville, the continental shelf is much further out, so you have to travel, maybe 100 miles offshore before you get to that same drop off. So, the geology undersea is varied now, and probably was varied then too. But at least, much of Florida was underwater, most all of it. And now those areas are generally like the lowlands. So in this area near Tallahassee, we were just talking about this, the Woodville Karst Plain. That is in an area of Gulf coastal lowlands. Excuse me, and that's essentially where where sea level used to be, where the shoreline used to be. So there's an escarpment called the Cody Scarp, and it's a drop off. It's just south of town in Tallahassee, and it's basically a hill where you're driving, and you can see it when you're driving, and then boop, all of a sudden you have this change in elevation and you slope downhill. Well, that's actually where the Gulf of Mexico used to be 100,000 years ago. So everything south of that was previously underwater. All these areas in the Woodville Karst Plain where the aquifer's unconfined, that used to be underwater. And up here in the Red Hills region, where we have all this clay and this, above the aquifer, that's where that actually used to be like the beach. And so, there's some areas that were never, or that weren't underwater, at least at that time, but mostly the fringes certainly were. And there's that ridge in the middle, the Lake Wales Ridge, that was always above water.
Yeah. So if you looked at like a map of the continental shelf, it's very different than the actual map of the continents. Like it'll overhang in certain areas where you wouldn't expect it. And that's kind of the way I'm kind of thinking of it, is that's where it's still, I don't even know, could just be land, like still part of the continent, not quite deep sea yet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, let's just say hypothetically sea level receded like a ton, right? If sea level receded a lot, then what's underwater now at the beach would be would be above water, and you'd have basically, it would be relatively flat. It would be getting lower, and then you'd get to the continental shelf and it would drop off. So it's just like how I'm describing how the Cody Scarp used to be. It's kind of how the continental shelf is. It's just still underwater. If sea level receded all the way to that point, it would be sort of the same. You'd be driving down the hill.
Yeah, but then there's something about the continental shelf where it's like that's the extreme drop off. The like, I can't really picture it receding any farther than that point.
Yeah, I don't know that it could or would, and now this gets into like geological modeling of tectonic plates and hypothetical scenarios, and over millions of years how it shifts and how it's projected to shift, and what things are projected to look like, from that perspective in a million years. I don't know, but I'm sure that the geologists have models for this, and they like, Pangea, right, used to be the supercontinent, and then the tectonic plates are shifting and continents are splitting and coming closer together, and we are where we are now, but it's always changing very slowly and gradually.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about.
Yeah. And that's, again, that's why, mostly in Florida we're built on calcareous sediment, because it used to be undersea.
Yeah. I gotta use the bathroom real quick.
Good deal. Go for it.
Right, where were we at? We were talking about The sea levels. That's right.
The history of the universe, man.
Yeah, that was like the longest PI ever, actually. So I needed to do that pretty bad.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
But it's really weird to think about the Earth is it's like got these the oceans are like if you drained all the water off of it and looked at the topography of this planet, like it's so weird how it's there's these little areas that just push up and jut out and become like where the land is. It's very weird. I don't know. But
It
then
is
again,
weird.
like are most planets like that? I wonder, or are tectonic plates something that's unique to Earth, or is it maybe Earth? I wonder if it's
I don't believe so.
Earth at this stage in its life cycle, maybe.
I think Venus has tectonic plates, and there's some evidence that Mars maybe used to have active plates, but they've gone dormant, and that's
It like cooled off too much.
they've
Or
cooled off
something.
too much. Exactly. So the way that the tectonic plates move is generally because the mantle is very hot, the inner Earth, and honestly, I'm not an expert in this, but that creates these areas where when you have two plates that are colliding, they start to subside into like a rift, and
Like into the mantle,
into
right?
the mantle, and that material gets recycled, so that crust is effectively recycled back into the mantle, where then on the other side of the plate, right, you've got one side going in and on the other side going out. So it's kind of this concept of active margins versus passive margins, and so like the Atlantic coast of the United States is passive, in the sense that we are not.
In an active like collision with another plate.
Yeah, and maybe it's better to actually describe it the other way. So the Pacific coast is an active margin where the tectonic plate out there is colliding with another one, and it's pushing the Earth up. So where these plates are colliding, it's causing the crust to be pushed up,
Oh, and that's why it caused earthquakes there.
that's why it causes earthquakes on the West Coast, and that's
Right.
why the beach in California, there's like cliffs and stuff all along the beach, because that plate is subsiding into the or into the mantle, or crashing into another plate essentially, and it's causing it's basically buckling,
Yeah.
and creating mountains, which is how they're created. Whereas on the other side, this plate, we're splitting further from the African plate on our margin on the Atlantic side. So it's going that way. It's going east to west.
So does it make the ocean deeper on the Pacific side?
There's a rift
Is it like a
valley, so
trench?
there is a trench. Yeah.
So does the Pacific Ocean get deeper quicker than the Atlantic? I would imagine the continental shelf is.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
I feel like that's something that I might have heard also, but
Yeah. This is kind of like geology. I mean, this is geology, and I know some geology, but
it reminds
I don't know that.
me of being like in fifth grade, learning about geology in the library at Ocean Palms from that librarian. I don't know if you ever learned about stuff from her, but she would always teach us stuff about tectonic plates, and
Yeah.
we'd go on the computers. She'd be like, you double click on these old dinosaur computers.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Geology is super cool. I think like people should learn more about, just the cycles that we all experience but don't realize, and that affect our planet every day, like the water cycle, and how that impacts like the geologic cycles, and further like on a grand large scale, how all that impacts like our ice age cycles and things like that. And
It's so cool. It makes me picture the Earth almost as when you start seeing these cycles in it, you start seeing the Earth as almost this organism itself that's like
yeah,
almost alive, and
It's
that
crazy.
it's going through it's this cyclical, just it's not a static, constant object. It's
Yeah.
always changing internally and externally.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you got to think, right? Like it's all part of the system, where the plates are subsiding into the mantle. It's creating, new, I don't even know what it's called, but you basically get these magma plumes there and it creates volcanism. And so that's why you
Just
have
like Hawaii.
exactly all that stuff.
That's
So
super
it all
cool.
makes sense if you, learn about the systems
Wow.
that control it.
Yeah, dude. Because I remember learning about this stuff in maybe seventh grade, sixth grade. You learn about some of these concepts that like Hawaii is made from volcanoes, and
Yeah.
the plates create the mountains. But when you looking back at it, I find it so much more fascinating now.
Yeah.
Thinking about how the Earth actually works, and the earthquakes. Like I remember as a kid, I never understood what mean the tectonic plates slip and there's an earthquake. It's like, but now it makes so much more sense thinking about it now.
Right. And, they used GIS and geospatial technology to model these things. So it's just another example of how, this tool, this field is really revolutionary and it's really finding its way into all industries where it's from modeling earthquakes to managing air traffic control, geospatial data and the ability to track and model and, basically create these models of the earth or create models of certain systems and then play that out through time. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, I wonder. I was thinking about. Do you think it plays a role in weather patterns and stuff? Or is that,
GIS?
yeah. Or do you
Yeah,
think,
well, I mean, it plays a role. I mean, it's used in weather modeling too. I mean, right? So what are they doing when they're tracking a hurricane or they're tracking a storm? I mean,
running like
it's
creating
GIS
models? Yeah.
because all it really means is like we're gathering data, right? So they go out and they say, okay, we are here at this point, and the atmospheric pressure is this, the humidity is this, the temperature is this, and here so there's data points, right? These metrics of atmospheric pressure, whatever, temperature, but they're tied to a location. And then you collect a number of data points tied to various locations, and then you can model from that. It's basically like, hey, when they say the rain is coming, it's like they have the data and it's tied, it's basically tying data that's not geospatial to that geospatial component. And it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, the way I'm picturing it right now is they almost sort of squeeze the data through a model to try to predict the most likely path that it's going to go through by taking points. You said they take the point where it is, the measurements, and then points around it. And based on the points around it, the path of least resistance is
Right.
like it almost, I'm picturing it
know
as
about
like a stream that like looking at this data, this storm is naturally going to follow this stream because of the way that.
Yeah, because of gradients and things like that, pressure gradients and temperature gradients,
Yeah,
right?
all that kind of stuff.
So if we can,
jet streams and whatever.
and
I
and
don't
so
even know what that means, but I know it's like important for
sure.
weather.
Yeah, it's all pretty cool.
Are jet streams in the ocean or in the atmosphere?
Well, now you're putting me on the
Probably
spot.
both. I don't even remember.
Well,
Yeah,
there's currents in both. I think
There's-
the jet stream is I think that's a atmospheric current, or there's the Gulf Stream, maybe is what I'm thinking of. I don't really know, but there's a major atmospheric current that
right. I think those are the jet streams.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look it up just to. Is the Gulf Stream an atmospheric current or?
I'm not sure. I could be confusing this. Gulfstream might be a like an RV brand.
Yeah, the jet streams are narrow bands of strong winds that occur in the upper atmosphere and they're responsible for many weather patterns.
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense. That's what I thought. But there's currents in the ocean too. There's the I forget their names, but there's a number of them.
That's how the currents in the ocean are how navigators way back when they used to sail the oceans, that's how they would create their maps of routes to sail. If we're going to sail from here to here, the masters of the ocean and sea, like captains and seafaring men would
Yeah.
figure out these currents, and they would ride the currents so that they could get, because you can't go against the current in the ocean. If you try to go against the current,
If you're sailing.
if you're
Yeah.
sailing, you can't go against the current. You have to follow these streams to get from where, to follow the best path. So like, they're still probably even used today, honestly.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. I know that at least the jet stream, from an air traffic control perspective, certainly is. If you're going to fly somewhere, they sometimes like you don't just take a straight line flight, based on the curvature of the earth and other air traffic, but also these air currents. Like you'll want to, they take certain strategic routes to kind of minimize resistance against the currents and kind of ride with them.
Yeah,
and then
I never even thought about
going
that.
a certain, if I'm flying to China, we're going to take a different route than when we're flying home because of the currents.
Yeah,
Things like that. So
they're like
that all comes into
unilateral.
play.
But
it affects real world things too, because the ocean currents, you don't think about it, right? But these sea currents, like for example, there's this one current that's responsible. It brings a lot of cold water into climate that is otherwise warmer water, and so it's like a cold water current, and the cold water current brings with it certain nutrients. I could be botching this, but it's something to that effect, and the sardine populations depend on that current to bring in the necessary conditions for nutrients for them to survive, and then the bird populations then depend on the sardine populations to be adequate to feed them. And I think this is somewhere near Peru. Then those bird populations, there's these islands that are offshore, like these little rock islands where these birds, they go out there and they land and they shit on these rocks.
Heard of this? Yeah. I forgot about it though.
They shit on these rocks and create mass concentrations of bird shit on these rocks. And bird shit is birds urine, they don't pee, so they excrete everything in one. And so again, the details I'm not sure. I think humans excrete urea and birds excrete uric acid. And anyway, the point of the story is that it's very rich in phosphorus. And so back during World War One or two,
One of the great wars.
one of those wars, I got the details right, but one of those, there was a need. I think it was World War One. They needed a better way to create gunpowder, and so they actually discovered that they could use this bird shit waste to make gunpowder, and then ultimately after the war, we use. So now they know how to synthesize it and everything, but that's become fertilizer now.
Yeah, and wasn't the idea that during the war we took over that island? And that was
we needed it. It was
yeah.
important. We needed the bird shit island because otherwise we weren't going to be able to make the weapons. And I don't even know who did that or what, but
yeah.
So that's at least kind of the basics of the story.
All stemming from the cold water
from the current.
stream.
Yeah,
The cascading of effects it's pretty crazy. Think
it
about
is. Yeah, people don't
how
realize
how everything is just connected.
Yeah.
You can draw a link from anything on this planet to any other thing, no matter what it is, and you can draw a link between the two, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
Yeah. Well, I guess we've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, we've
Probably gonna wrap
pretty
it up
much
here.
hit every topic, I think.
I know. I'd love to keep going, but
Yeah,
I really enjoyed this talk. It was a great talk with you, and I appreciate you coming out to speak with me.
For sure, absolutely,
to do this
man. I've enjoyed
podcast.
it as well. I would be happy to come back, whenever. I think it's great.
Yeah, I'd
So
love to
thanks
have
for
you
having
back
me.
also.
Cool.
Love to have you back. And I'm going to try to have more people on, more guests and stuff. I think you were a great guest.
Well,
And,
that's great. Thank you.
Maybe one day we could do this with a couple other people. You
Yep,
never know.
for sure.
And yeah, thanks
All
for coming
right,
up.
sounds good.
All right, bye guys.